Chris, just to note that you're still missing Savian and Chris Gomez-Schmidt.
Maybe we should wait a couple minutes for them. Are they in the waiting room or?
No, they are not.
They're not.
Oh,
Okay.
Chris is here. Yep, now they both are.
Cool.
Okay, one moment.
Thanks, Barb.
Yep. All right, go ahead, Chris.
Thanks, Barb. Appreciate it. So I'll call the meeting to order. I want to welcome everybody to the September 14th, 2020 Operations Workgroup meeting. We're going to be discussing 3 agenda items tonight. The first one is the 2020-21 budget. We're going to vote on the final budget and tax levy at our October 26th regular meeting. Our second agenda item is a property purchase, which we will vote on some preliminary documents at the September 21st regular meeting. And finally, we're going to have a discussion about operations for virtual learning. And while this discussion is primarily informational, we will be asked to approve air quality improvements in the September consent agenda. So with all that in mind, we do have 2 public appearances tonight. And Barb, we go ahead and let him in.
Okay, the first speaker is Marcia Campbell. Chris, I'm just going to have the timer on in the background. Thank you.
Okay. Will I be able to see it?
Why not?
Okay, I'll let you keep time. Hi, Marcia.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very well. Hi, Ananda. Hello, everyone.
So just go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay. My name is Marcia Campbell, and I am the Executive Director of Rooted, formerly Center for Resilient Cities. And we are the owner of the Badger Rock building and property at 501 East Badger Road. And I just wanted to express my enthusiasm to the group tonight for the proposed purchase of the building. As the memo to you all from Kelly and Chad states, we had long planned a phase 2 and just were never able to pull it off. And the phase 2 would have been an expansion of the activities there at Badger Rock. So when the district approached us about the purchase of the building, it was just the most fortuitous thing, we felt. And it will provide a neighborhood that has not had schools and public buildings and places to meet and that sort of thing until the advent of Badger Rock for many decades, since the old Badger School was demolished. And so I'm just here to express our enthusiasm, our appreciation for the sound process and the length of the process in terms of careful negotiations and sorting out things to our mutual benefit. And so I just wanted to come here and say that. I think it's going to be a tremendous, an elementary school at this location would be a tremendous benefit to the neighborhood. It's something that we have heard anecdotally from many families at our community dinners that they would like to see. And so I'm happy to stick around and answer questions or whatever the process is in this new virtual meeting environment. But thank you for the time tonight, and that's all I have.
Chris, you're muted. Thank you so much, Marcia.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Marcia. Thanks, Ananda.
Thank you. Okay, the next person is Joe Steinbrenner. Hello, Joe. Can we see your video, please, Joe? Perfect. And then can you unmute your mic, please? Perfect.
Hi, Joe.
Joe.
Welcome. And just go ahead and start whenever you're ready.
Me. I can start my statement now. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Joe Steinbrenner. I live at 818 Prospect Place in Madison and have been active in community affairs for about 40 years. I speak on behalf of an affirmative vote on item number 5 on the agenda. I've been involved in South Madison issues for over 40 years, which includes the space of the Badger Rock Neighborhood Center, as well as the Badger Rock Middle School. These initiatives have greatly assisted the South Madison in their revitalization. And this initiative proposed by the school staff to the board will continue that process. It is an underserved area. It is an area that deserves much better attention and support from both the school district and from the city. And this is a very positive move in that direction. I support the initiatives contained and the specifics contained in item number 5. And I would like to commend the staff of the district and helpful work in bringing this matter forward. And I do urge everyone to consider this matter carefully in the community and vote on behalf of the referendum in November. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. We appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, sir. That concludes the public appearances, Chris.
Thank you, Barb. All right, let's move on to the approval of minutes. So Barb, it looks like we just have one set of minutes to approve tonight.
Correct. That's correct. Yes.
Thank you. I move to approve the minutes from the operations work group meeting dated July 13th, 2020.
Second, Nikki Vandermeer.
All right, all those in favor say aye, raise your hand. Any opposed? All right, motion passes.
Thank you.
All right, let's launch into our 2020-2021 budget update. While Barb or Kelly are taking care of PowerPoint stuff, I thought I would just give just a bit of context before we launch into this conversation. So back in June, we deliberated and passed a draft preliminary budget amidst unprecedented uncertainty. And because of that, we still have a lot of work to do before we approve a final budget at the end of October, which is really different for us. Normally, by the time we reach this time of year, we're in pretty good shape. We know a little bit more than we knew in June, but we're still facing many unknowns. Those include the status of a state budget repair bill, several federal COVID relief acts that are pending and may or may not make it through Congress. Enrollment is still a little bit of an unknown, although we'll know more after this Friday. What instruction looks like throughout this school year is still kind of a big question mark. Right now we're virtual. We could shift to hybrid or in person at different points during this year, depending on the trajectory of COVID. And finally, we're not sure yet whether or not we will gain additional revenue authority should the operating referendum pass. And we won't know that until after we pass our budget. So this is a lot of unknowns, but despite that fact, we can plan for them. And tonight's discussion is all about understanding the things that we can control and what we do know, and using that information to make the best possible budget decisions for the district. So tonight we need to accomplish the following. We need to give Kelly our feedback about some updated revenue assumptions. In June, we passed the preliminary budget, assuming that there would be no new revenue from the state. Now that we have more information about the state budget, we're revisiting that assumption. We also need to give Kelly some feedback on expenditures under 2 different possible budget scenarios. One where the operating referendum passes and one where it does not pass. And finally, this is an opportunity to answer everybody's questions. Our next meeting is on October 12th, and we'll have 2 weeks after that meeting before we vote on the final budget and tax levy. So this meeting is really the opportunity to get your questions out there so that Kelly has adequate time to address them, to incorporate suggestions into the next budget that she presents to us. By the time October 12th runs around, it's going to be pretty tight before our vote. So please do take advantage of the opportunity tonight to clarify anything that seems confusing and to put any ideas on the table that you think need to be out there.
Is there someone, I hear a lot of clicking. Is there something that's clicking, or is that just my machine?
I am not hearing.
Wondering
clicking.
if it's, yeah, I'm wondering if it's your headphone, Chris. There is a little bit of a
Oh,
static happening. I noticed
is that better?
Oh,
Much.
yes, much better.
Much.
Okay. All right, I'm sorry
Sorry.
about that. I couldn't hear it. Okay, so before I hand this over to Kelly, I just want to point out that we'll have 3 points in the presentation for feedback and discussion. We're going to pause once to discuss revenue assumptions. We'll pause again to discuss expenditures. Then there will be time for questions and discussion at the end of the presentation. And so let's Kelly take it away.
Dr. Jenkins, do you want to make any opening statements before I get started? And I may have seen Ali's hand up.
Yes, I would. Thank you so much, Kelly. First of all, let me just say, again, kudos to not only Kelly, but her team for the fine job that they've done. And I think that the memo that she sent out, shared with all of you previously, speaks to a lot of what you're going to be seeing today in the budget. And I think it was, Chris, thank you so much for the way that you even opened it up and just knowing our realities in terms of where we are, what we knew then, what we know now, and still working with what may and may not come from the state. We have to be as agile as possible. But thank you to Kelly and her team for the work that they've done to make sure that we can be as prudent as possible as we're moving forward with this 2021 presentation. So, Kelly, please.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Ali, did you need to get a comment in before I get started?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think it's relevant throughout this conversation that board members independently navigate their conflicts of interest. And so I wanted to bring that to the table.
Thank you, Ali. I always appreciate you bringing that forward. Barb, I don't seem to have the ability to flip the slides. Would you mind? Thank you. All right, so the meeting objectives tonight, as laid out very well by Chris, is primarily to kind of get everyone back on the same page on our timeline as we get ready for the October budget vote that you will be doing at the end of the month on October, both for a passing and on a non-passing referendum, so 2 separate budget votes. And the assumptions that we'll be building into those both on the revenue and expenditure side. Slide, Barb. And Barb, could you move to the next slide for me? We always like to put in the room our educational equity policy. So a reminder that our equity policy will lead the way as it makes a decision for our budget work. Along within the next slide, we always lead with our core values and the goals of our strategic framework and our decision making. So we always want to make sure that we're putting those forward into the room. So Barb, if you could scoot on forward right over to our approach slide. There you go. So as a reminder, this is our approach to the budgeting process. We always start out with the goals, the guiding principles, of which you all put together in front of us all the way back in January. It seems like a lifetime ago. We build our revenue forecasting, we make our assumptions, we use our projection enrollment, and then we start on our expenditure strategy, both in compensation, staffing, our equity projects, healthcare, and more. In this case, for this year, we are on our 3rd round, what I will call our phase 3, meaning we did all that great work together between January and March. We got close to an April budget and then COVID hit. And we needed to go back through that process between April and June, revisit our assumptions, revisit our expenditures, and in June, You voted on our preliminary budget, of which we're operating on today. The preliminary budget is located at the link on the bottom of this slide. We are now at a point where we need to go through that process again over the next 2 months as we prepare for the October budget vote. We'll revisit our assumptions and make decisions on expenditures in much the same way we are used to working together at these other times throughout the year. So we'll start with revenue. Key part to revenue, of course, is enrollment. And you'll see that on the next slide, Barb. So all of our enrollment projections, all of our revenue is primarily based on our enrollment projections. Our revenue limit formula, along with our per pupil categorical aid, is based on the enrollment and the students we have in the school district. This was the slide we were all kind of on the same page in as it related to the June budget. Our long-term projections that Andrew's team pulls together projected a 51 student loss going into this school year. And that was in the budget of which you approved in June. At this point, we're still a week away from taking final enrollment counts, and a lot of great work is happening at our schools, contacting families, enrolling kids. Kids are coming to pick up devices, we get them enrolled, so the numbers are changing daily. So at this point, there's no definitive number for enrollment yet, as Chris suggested. As we get closer to October, we'll finalize that. We'll have our preliminary numbers on Friday, but the state certifies our number. They have their own process, they do. And so we won't have those numbers until the beginning of October. At this point, for the purposes of moving forward on the budget, we are estimating about a 1% to a 3% loss in students. And at this point, just to get the budget moving, we have put in a loss of 400 students to balance the budget. Now, I put this at the front of the budget to ensure you understand we have a game plan in place regarding this. Again, these numbers can get much better by the time we hit Friday. But in the meantime, the student loss is directly tied to the decisions that we've made about putting hiring freezes in place across the district, not just at schools, but across central office as well. Those estimates have been designed to balance the budget based on enrollment losses. If enrollment comes out better, we'll be able to release a number of our positions. If enrollment ends up kind of where it is, we'll be in a place where we can balance this budget. And at this point, I don't project balance as much worse than that. But of course, we'll have room to move between now and the end of October, should they. So right now, we're just starting with a point that allows us to move forward at the budget and our work. And as we get final numbers, we'll continue to go back, revisit those assumptions and the decisions that need to follow with revenue. So based on enrollment, we get two forms of revenue, a revenue limit and a per pupil categorical aid. It's all designed on a per pupil basis. The budget that the state approved back in July of last year allowed for $179 per pupil in a revenue limit and $0 change in the per pupil categorical aid. So together, that's $179 per pupil. Based on where the state's conversations were at in the spring, we all decided together to make a very good choice, which was just to pause and wait and see how the state deliberations turned out. So instead of budgeting for the $179 that you see on this particular slide, we budgeted for a $0 base. So we'll see how that all plays out in the next two slides. So in March and April, before COVID, we thought we would be getting that $179 per pupil, which is $4.8 million, a special education increase of 4%. We knew we weren't going to get anything in new operating referendum money, right? Because the referendum authority ran out from 2016. And we were predicting a slight decrease in students with that -50 that we saw previously. Therefore, we had $7.6 million to budget with for our new expenses for this coming year, along with repurposing internally to make sure we funded the expenses we needed. With inflation at 1.8%, we knew we weren't going to have the funding we needed for everything we needed. So we did $8 million in budget cuts before COVID even hit in order to balance the budget that we were just about to get ready to vote on when COVID hit. And so instead, what we did in June, the next slide there, is we made a decision together to kind of pause. And Barb, there you go. And what we did is the $179, we budgeted $0 of that, not knowing if the state would take it away before we got to October. We also chose not to budget any of the special education and reimbursement aid. Again, because that was up in question, that by October, we weren't sure if it was still going to be on the table. We moved our expenses along with that to make sure our June budget was balanced. The decision that we put in place at that time was to freeze our compensation and to freeze any new strategic equity projects that had not yet been implemented or voted on at that point in time. And those decisions we knew were just a pause. We knew we were going to press on pause and come back to that conversation. Ultimately, that's where we are today. So we're taking kind of our finger off that pause button so we can make a new set of assumptions and a new set of decisions together as a team. And in the next slide, I'm going to walk you through what some of those various kind of strategies might be on revenue. We need to make sure as a team we're all together on our revenue assumptions. Previously, different than previous years, normally by this point in time, we would know a lot more. Chris went through a good list of unknowns in her opening remarks, so I won't repeat them. But it means that we've got to make some guesses as a team together, and we need to kind of balance out the risks associated in the unknowns and invest in our staff and our students to make sure we have a good school year. We actually need to do both. And so with that in mind, we need to decide if we're going to put the $179 per pupil back into the budget. You'll see that June scenario is highlighted in yellow there for you. We also need to make a decision if we think per pupil categorical aid might decrease should a budget repair bill come forward in the November through January timeframe, which is still being signaled at the state level that a state budget repair bill could be coming forward. And the per pupil categorical aid is one item that is not protected by law and that we don't receive the revenue until March. So it is an area where the state might move. Similarly, the special education reimbursement rate is entirely funded directly from the state and is not distributed until December after the school year, which means it's another area that could potentially move in the November to December time frame should there be a state budget repair bill. So those are three kind of unknown revenue sources, which we need to make some kind of our own guesses as we decide what expenses we might tie to them moving forward. We do know one thing, and that is, if you recall back to our March conversations, we have $1 million of healthcare savings that was not otherwise budgeted back from March. We decided as a team to pause and not tie any investments to that. And we've been holding it in the June budget in a reserve account, which is what we all agreed to do in June. So that is back on the table. It's a known quantity and has actual money tied to it. So I'm very comfortable in tying that to an expense at this point. Similar to that, our low interest rates from our cash borrowing that you approved just last month generated $500,000 in savings. That is real cash that I'm happy to kind of invest in this budget. So that line is pretty well known. So with those kind of moving parts on the table, our decision could be to continue down our current path of budgeting zeros and stick with the decisions we've made around expenses, knowing that there are still a lot of unknowns out there for us. We could move back to our April budget assumptions and assume that COVID never happened. Rather than kind of taking either one of those extremes, what I'm proposing for you today is that we do build the $179 per pupil back into the budget. And that's because we have clear guidance coming out of the state that a state budget repair bill before October is very, very unlikely. And this funding is tied to the tax limit of which will get certified at the end of October. So it's very unlikely that this 179 is the lever that the state is going to pull kind of at this point in time. The other two levers remain possible, as I just mentioned. And so you could pull one or the other, but I'm recommending we just pull one versus two. Ultimately, that we assume the categorical aid stays the same going into January, but that the special education reimbursement aid might not come through for us as otherwise planned. These two numbers are pretty interchangeable. The numbers are very similar in our overall budget. And instead of kind of pulling both levers, I'm recommending that we not budget for one of them in order to kind of hold our risk related to a state budget repair bill and or reimbursement aid just generally coming in lower than would have otherwise anticipated due to the effects of COVID. So altogether, if we update these assumptions, it would give us $6.3 million to discuss how we might move on the expenditures moving forward. In any case, our mill rate, when we're talking about a non-referendum passing mill rate in this budget alone, is not likely to increase. And that's because our property values across the city of Madison are increasing at a faster pace than our expenses. So the base is getting bigger. And so mill rate for each individual property owner is likely to drop. If you go to $0 revenue and you don't collect those taxes at all, it drops quite a bit. It drops 13 cents for every $1,000 in home value. But in the scenario A that I'm suggesting here, you're looking at about a 0 cent mill rate change with $179 built in. And with that, Chris, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kelly. So we're going to pause here for questions. I cannot see everybody, and I think it's important to keep this slide up. So if I don't call on you and you have a question, just say my name so I call on you. Nikki, I do see your hand, so go ahead.
Sure. Kelly, thank you for the work. I really appreciate that. Just for clarification, the majority of the board did approve the budget and did approve the withholding of the expenditures, and I understand that. I just didn't want people to assume that we all agreed unanimously. I think that's very important to explain that it wasn't a unanimous vote because of one of those weird sticklers for rules. Blame the attorney in me. But just quick question on the hiring freeze. And also on the, I am for scenario A, absolutely 100%. And I think that should be done in both passing or non-passing. And can we, and I'm not a money person. I'm the first person in the world to admit it. So if it's possible, can you, and I've read the memo 3 times and I'm still kind of stuck. Can you explain exactly how we got, it says $16 million surplus, but that doesn't seem right. And I'm kind of confused. Is there a way you can walk me through it? I hope that's not saying too much. I just honestly am confused on that. And also, is there any way that we could make sure actually, and is it possible to do both levers? I want to make sure our students and our staff have the best and what they need at this time. And those are my 3 questions.
Sorry. Nikki and Chris, with your permission, I'd like to hold a fund balance question until the last content slide, which directly addresses the assigned fund balance, just to kind of remain within that structure. I will come back to it, Nikki. That is one-time funding sources, so it's not directly tied to this revenue discussion, but I will definitely come back to it. As it relates to the categorical aid and special education aid, leaving the categorical aid at 0 is a pretty kind of risky move to make. Because it is a tool that's very easy to move. So I would not recommend putting both categorical aid and special education aid back in. What I would be fearful what would happen is that you've kind of over projected revenues and therefore overspend the budget by the time we get to the end of the year. If we get to January and special education reimbursement kind of rate comes back in, we will know that by the end of the year. We will know that by June. And we can always do what we will talk about in a little bit, which is assign that funding specifically to special education kind of projects or expenses to make sure it ties into the right budget. If everything comes in as optimistic as it is, but we will not know that until well towards the end of next year. It's just an item that we get money on based on what we spend and based on what other districts across the state spend. So there's a lot of unknowns tied to that dollar amount. And very few districts across the state that I know of are budgeting in as a revenue source at all.
All right, other questions or comments?
Chris, I'd like to ask a couple questions.
Of course. Go ahead, Ollie.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation thus far, Kelly, and all the work that's gone into this and the revisions that have happened up to this point. I think, a lot of what you spoke to is the board's refusal in this moment of crisis to be short-sighted and really thinking through making sure that we have the greatest availability of options in terms of the ability to allocate resources in the interest of our young people and our educators and our schools. That being said, I am curious in terms of scenario A, why the full amount for the revenue limit per pupil change and why the full amount for savings and healthcare to be reintroduced into the budget and not I guess a more a more preventative amount.
The full revenue limit, because I truly believe at this point it's coming. I truly believe at this point that it's not the lever that will be pulled. So tied to that, why the full healthcare amount? Primarily because the state recently released a memo, which I made sure the board had in their hands, which said that while a budget repair bill could very well still be coming, the state's revenues fell short about 0.6%, which is better than previously predicted. So using kind of that assumption, we're basing a potential state budget repair bill more in the $3 million range loss than in the kind of $7 to $10 million range loss that we were previously predicting. Now that we have actual state numbers coming out of the state. 21-22, kind of that next biennium might be the year where the economic hit hits, and we'll know more about that. But for now, based on what we have in front of us, I'm trying to take a middle ground. I'm trying to not be too conservative. And I'm trying to not over budget. And to me, for me and the team who we've been looking at this for weeks, I think this is where we're coming in on our comfort zone. But certainly, if the board wants to make a different decision and to move further towards scenario C in a direction of not budgeting healthcare, for example, that absolutely be a place we'd be comfortable in operating in.
Is there, I mean, I think I think to call this situation unprecedented is almost an understatement at this point, but I think, are we factoring in or anticipating the current kind of growth and spread of COVID as a reality and factor in some of our both immediate and long-term decision-making?
Yeah, absolutely. And our eyes, my team's eyes, are starting to move to the 21-22 school year already as it relates to the economic impact at the state level, the revenue we might receive, any property value losses that may hit our property taxes. At this point, the 2021 year is happening. So our numbers are looking more like actuals. It's the 21-22 and the longer kind of this pandemic plays out and the economic impacts play out, the harder and harder it's going to be without, additional monies coming in from the referendum, for example.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thanks, Ollie. Are there other questions at this point?
Got one, Chris.
Thanks, Vivian. Go ahead.
Thank you, Kelly, for the presentation and your team. Just real quick, is it, depending on factors at the state level, is it likely that a state budget repair bill impacts our next fiscal year budget than this one?
Yeah. I think, well, the state budget repair bill is a technical term. So if it's going to impact anything, it's going to impact this year because what they're repairing is this year's budget. So just there, the little technicality in the term you used, but the deliberations at the state level regarding the next biennium budget, which will be the 21-23 biennium, absolutely is going to be impacted by COVID. I don't see how it can't. So I think both potential state budget repair bill affecting this year and then the biennium clearly being impacted by the economic figures that'll come out and projections for the future.
And my last question is, with scenario A and C, are there decisions we can make with this budget that can reinforce or provide some level of reinforcements from those potential impending cuts to state aid?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I don't think I followed it.
Are there decisions we can make with this budget that can lessen the blow to future budget cuts at the state level?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more reoccurring expenses you invest in, especially without knowing if we have a past referendum, will make it harder in future years to continue to support kind of the way we operate in a sustainable way, right? The number of people, the amount of conversation, kind of the way we work. So I would say that's probably mostly on the expenditure side of how we operate versus this decision right here, though, as far as revenue goes.
Okay.
Thanks, Avian. Other questions?
Chris, I have a question. It's Chris.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kelly, thanks for this information. Looking again at scenario A and the updated scenario for funding, with that revenue limit per pupil change, does that include the loss of enrollment potential that you calculated in that 6.3 million total?
No, it does not, which is why I intentionally kind of separated the two in my opening of my revenue comments, because I'm trying to like bucket these so that they're not complicated by each other. They certainly impact each other, but I'm trying to bucket the conversations to help suggest that we will be okay with the enrollment loss. We're making sure we have the right strategies in place for that. And we need to decide if we're going to put the 179 into the budget. The 179 is multiplied by the number of students we have in a quite complicated formula. Right. So the decision to go with scenario A is kind of what I need from you. And I don't want anybody to get too complicated by that. But at the end of the day of the formula is such that it's a 3-year average. So if you add 1 year, that's, let's just say kind of artificially or a 1-year blip low, it will carry down our average. That number gets multiplied by the 179 and our revenues would decrease. Now, the formula does have a floor that's built into the law of what's called a declining enrollment. It's very likely that we're going to trigger that at some point based on this enrollment loss, but we have a lot of moving parts here. We have 2X charters in play. We have open enrollment in play. We've got 4K in play. It is very difficult right now to know if we're going to trigger that or not. But what we've built is the kind of savings on the hiring freeze side to help us cushion that after all these numbers come in mid-October. Every year it's the same thing. All the numbers come in mid-October and we got to kind of relook at everything all together. This year is just a bit more extreme, but we won't know until mid-October of where the other numbers are all moving.
Okay, so you're guessing that by mid-October, we will have a much more solid indication on enrollment and our staffing needs to go along with this?
We will have a much more solid on enrollment. There will not be enough time to do our full staffing analysis from the moment I get the DPI certification on enrollment and all the information on the 2X charters, which may not even be in my hands by the time we meet on October 12th. It'll be right in and around there that we get the information from the state. The staffing analysis will have to follow.
Okay. And I appreciate how complicated this is. I just know that there have been internal reallocations and staffing decisions made that are temporary. And if I guess just as much of a handle as we can get on that and how that's going to play out for the rest of the year would be helpful too.
We've built the plan such that so long as we're in virtual, it can sustain on itself. And the goal would be once we get kids back in, that we can start reversing and making sure that we have the right staff in place once kids are in person.
Okay, thank you.
Gloria or Ananda, any questions?
Not at this moment, Chris. Thank you.
Okay. Not hearing any other questions. I would like to do, I'll just call your names, but I would like to just go around and have everybody say if you're feeling comfortable with scenario A, and if not, if scenario B or C or the April budget best case is closer to what you're comfortable with. So let's start with Ollie.
Thank you, Chris. I think scenario A is the scenario that gives us the greatest flexibility at this time. And so I am the most comfortable leaning in that direction.
Ananda?
I'd like to go last, please.
Okay. Chris?
I think given Kelly's explanation and given a best guess as to where we are with the state budget and how that might fall out, I guess I am comfortable with scenario A at this point.
Gloria?
Yeah, I agree. I think scenario A is where we should go.
Nikki?
As much as I would like to do the April budget, I can't guarantee on the special ed reimbursement, so I will go scenario A.
Savian?
Given all the unknowns, scenario A seems like the most likely outcome we'll get. So scenario A.
I feel very comfortable with scenario A. Kelly, am I right in saying that our total per pupil categorical aid budget is about 20 million? Is that the right number?
Yeah, you're in the right ballpark. I can get you an exact number after the meeting. I don't have it right now, but yeah, you're in the right ballpark.
Ballpark's fine. So if you look at
We're not going to
2.8
lose our whole categorical aid in one swoop of a budget repair bill.
Exactly. Well, if you look at 2.8
Districts would be
million,
crippled by that across the state. So we aren't going to see that kind of loss.
if you look at the 2.8 million that we're budgeting to be lost in scenario A, that's roughly like not quite, but almost 15% of our categorical aid, which to me feels like a pretty safe place to land in terms of an assumption of a possible cut in a budget repair bill. So for that reason, combined with the really good explanation you gave of what's going to happen with per pupil revenue, I'm fine with A. And Ananda.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. I wanted to couple that with some comments. Kelly, I have never seen anyone do all this work so masterful as you have done. You really created a story about the budget, and then you had to go back to that story and then create multiple stories from the original story and then change the entire book completely because of so many things changed. So I wanted to elevate sentiments that my colleagues have shared and Dr. Jenkins have shared around the level of expertise you have demonstrated in regards to the flexibility to learn new things, to expand your thinking around how to do budget and how to communicate with us about the budget, but also your ability to think creatively around problem solving and give us a really good scenario that can allow us to have flexibility to understand what are the concerns, to be able to still make decisions, but also continue to provide us with great flexibility. So I want to just to share that has not gone unnoticed, and I really appreciate your work and the work of your team to make sure that all of this is happening. And I know that there is still more to come. I don't even think that we're like halfway there yet, because once everything you start fall into places, there might be some other curveballs and in a sea of uncertainties. Having said that, I appreciate the recommendation of scenario. I'm sorry.
I coughed.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. I appreciate the recommendation on scenario A, and I'm in agreement with my colleagues. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. All right. It sounds like we've got consensus around scenario A, Kelly, and we can move on.
Yeah, Barb, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So thank you to everybody, because that really helps set us up for the next conversations that we'll be having, not only tonight, but into October, which is now we get to decide how to spend the $6.3 million we all just agreed to. So I'm going to walk through kind of this whole slide and the next whole slide before I pause for questions. That's kind of based on Chris's planning. So kind of hang with me. They're directly related. So this slide is what I would call the non-passing budget plan. So if we just generated $6.3 million on top of the decisions we made in June, we need to decide how we want to allocate that funding. Total compensation is what we froze in June. So it makes sense to start there because that's where we really ended in June. That's where we paused. We also paused on a couple strategic equity projects. The $400,000 tied to the first phase of the reading curriculum is one of those items that we paused on, as well as the safety and security assistance, which was a very small dollar amount. Both of those items I have built into the budget already because they were items that this board had already planned on building into the strategic framework. So I want to be clear about that first so that we can move into the next layer of decision making, which is largely around compensation. So the step schedule is not a negotiated item by law, kind of from Act 10. That's a decision this board needs to make as to whether we will kind of give those longevity steps per the employee handbook that were put on pause back in June. Tied into the total compensation, then, in addition to the longevity movement that our staff would get based on your approval, we enter base wage negotiations with the union. Together, along with healthcare, they make up what is called total compensation. Base wage is a negotiated item. We aim to start negotiations with the union in about the next 2 weeks. So we aim to put the board in a closed session to discuss our base wage negotiation strategy in the upcoming kind of week or so. I say that because we won't be talking base wage strategy today, but I have it on this slide so that you can put things into perspective and give yourself a range. I do need some direction from this board as to whether we're going to put steps back in as we might in a traditional year. It's a big rock. So when I put it into the budget, a lot of moving parts are going to move around it. So based on your feedback tonight, I literally start building the budget book tomorrow, right? So let me walk through these scenarios. Highlighted in scenario A is where we were in June. We paused on steps, we paused on base wage. We could stay there. That would leave that $6.3 million that we just discussed on the previous slide available for other items in the budget. I'll come back to what those things might be in a minute. We can move to scenario B. Theoretically, you could put all the funding on base wage. We would have a little bit of funding left, not enough to fund steps for other projects. The state maximum is 1.8%, which is why I put 1.8% in there. It's for a matter of scale, right? So you can understand what kind of dollars we're talking about. Scenario C, we can't really do half steps. Our system doesn't really do half steps, but theoretically could implement steps second semester, meaning we stay on a longevity step through first semester, and then in second semester, we kind of press go in our budget system and move everybody to their longevity step such that they only collect 6 months worth of step, therefore saving money on the overall budget. That is a possibility. If that's the case, more money would be available for base wage, and more available for other items in this budget that might be needed. Or we go over to scenario D and we implement steps as we would in a traditional year in line with our handbook. That would leave kind of less funding available for base wage, less funding available for other projects in this non-passing budget. All of these are meant to be ranges. There's obviously decision and points between all of these scenarios, but I'm trying to give you scale. As it relates to available for unknowns, again, we just talked about unknowns for the budget repair bill. So this could be areas where you just put money aside into a reserve budget in case there's a budget repair bill. We know we have COVID expenses above and beyond what we have budgeted. We will spend some time later on in this meeting talking about air quality and some of the other items of which we're holding COVID money back for reservations now. In addition to that, we have schools that would still like additional funding for their teachers, kind of some of the supplies and things that are needed for at-home work. And there are all kinds of unknowns in what we may need once students come back and when they come back in our overall budget. So we know that there's plenty of need, but kind of weighing some of these out with each other is part of that conversation. Understanding that some of this conversation may not be able to happen in open session. So getting your feedback on steps is one of my primary objectives coming off of this slide. As we move to the next slide, similar thinking, but now we're in the passing budget, okay? So imagine we've balanced the non-passing budget. Now, when we go to referendum and it passes, we need to create a budget and where that $6 million that we'd be asking our taxpayers for authority, where it goes. And we need to validate that we are in fact going to use that whole authority when you approve the passing budget in October, because you approve both the non-passing and the passing budget both that night. So leaving some room in that investment for potential increases to the base wage. We understand that that is a board strategy that the board put in place back in January when we were building out our compensation strategy. So I wanted to bring that forward in line with previous board thinking. Again, there's ranges there. Just putting some dollars up on that screen to show you scale. But we want to make sure we bring forward the important discussions we were having around the passing referendum really prior to COVID and put them back on everyone's radar because this is the time to build them back in. We have had since the beginning a focus on early literacy. Dr. Jenkins joining us has put a kind of a double down on that particular focus of early literacy skills back on the table as being one of our highest priority investments. So we want to lead with that. And I'll pause it just a minute for Dr. Jenkins to jump into. But we have our reading materials that we've been talking about. So again, the non-passing budget already holds phase one, the $400,000. But the plan all along was in the passing budget, we get the entire $1 million that's needed to purchase all of the materials for our new reading materials. And Lisa, I'll ask to talk in just a minute as well. In order to focus on that early literacy, we know we want to put funding aside for the deep professional development that's needed around the science of teaching reading. High quality staff, focus on reading certified staff, really important. We learned both in our work this summer and in the spring, even when we went online, the reading certified teacher is incredibly important to our staff and outcomes. And then of course, the full day 4K that we've been talking about with the board and will continue to. The funding is already kind of planned for the planning for this year, but I just wanted to make sure when we talk about our early learning focus, I could not put full day 4K on this slide, but for this particular year, it doesn't have a budget ask. And then we bring back projects that this board has talked about for recommendation of use of this funding. That includes the special education transition project money, which this board might remember was removed out of the budget over a year and a half ago, put back on a one-time funding source with IDEA. We continue to need to get it off that one-time funding source and get it onto a reoccurring funding source in order for that great work with our special education kiddos to continue. This board talked about back in March, getting our micro schools on stable funding and off of TID 25, which runs out at the end of this year. So this is a really good opportunity to put micro schools on that stable funding, should the board want to do that. And we've been talking for well over a year now about putting some of this passing referendum money into the facility and maintenance budget, specifically so that we can do some projects in elementary and middle schools over the next year while the high school planning work continues. And if those are the projects that we're investing in from a priority investment standpoint, it does leave about $1.9 million available for the board. And that is really the same $1 million we talked about back in March when we debated the $4 or the $6 million kind of going to referendum for this year. Again, we have a number of COVID needs that I would recommend putting that to. We should not take off the table the potential to under levy. When we all talked back in July, we agreed that we would bring up that conversation before October came, in case the board did choose to under levy any of the referendum authority before we actually went to vote. So there are a couple strategies in there we can talk about, but I want to make sure you're aware of. So Lisa and Dr. Jenkins, if you have anything you want to add on the early literacy focus, and I know, Lisa, you got a board meeting coming up to talk with members more about it too, this would be the great time.
Thanks, Kelly. I appreciate that. You did a really good job explaining it. So thank you. We see the early literacy focus as just that. It's really a very focused strategy. It's about high expectations, and it is about anti-racist practices. And it's about supporting our teachers and our students with high quality teaching around the science of reading, and also the materials that are necessary to support high quality implementation in the classroom. So as Kelly said, we'll talk more about this in a couple of months at another instructional work group, but this is a very explicit focus on literacy, on teaching children how to read, and making sure that our staff have the tools that they need to be anti-racist leaders and have high expectations for student learning. Dr. Jenkins?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa and Kelly. And Kelly, really thanks for articulating what you did in terms of the priorities that we could see here. And I don't think it's no secret that I am really doubling, tripling down on the whole part of early literacy and beyond, and talk about the science of reading. Truly, when we're talking about the referendum and things that we're trying to do to disrupt what is going on, as Lisa just mentioned, talking about our anti-racist practices, one of the best ways to go after that is to really capture our children early on and beyond. But the whole science of reading is going to be significant when we start talking about decreasing these gaps, eliminating them between Black, brown, and special needs children. But yet at the same time, where we are, this is going to be something great when you look more into our data for all of our students, just not our students learning to read, but our teachers actually getting the professional development opportunity for them to be able to teach students appropriately how to read. So this is pretty big. And I think the whole emphasis on the micro schools, as we were trying to say, we're going to reach all students, give all students an opportunity. The micro schools are going to be very beneficial. And I think this is a sustainable way to ensure that those programs won't be disrupted by planning them with one-time type funding. So I look forward to having more discussions about each of these items, because they are very important, all of them, there to what we're trying to do, not only just in the short term, beyond COVID-19. These are just great intentions to move forward and to be able to sustain the practices that we want to put in place.
All right, thank you. So Chris, I think we're at a point where we can open up questions. I'll leave that up to you to decide.
Yep, I think we're ready to do that. Before we open up questions though, I want to lead off with a couple. And the first one I think is for Dr. Jenkins and maybe Kelly too. I really appreciate the information you've presented here about focusing this a passing operating referendum on early reading as a really important equity strategy in this district. I'm wondering if you could give a little bit more context as to what investments look like over the full 4 years of a passing operating referendum in terms of our early literacy work. And I assume that even if we don't pass this operating referendum, we're still going to put resources and effort into early literacy. But how does the operating referendum make it better? Like, what advantages do we get in terms of our early literacy strategy by passing this referendum?
Well, just from my experience too, not only do we have, if it doesn't pass, let's go there. If it doesn't pass, we have no option. It's a fundamental right for all of our students to be able to read, but it's also our duty to support our staff in teaching our students how to read. We have to commit ourselves to the professional development for our staff if we're going to hold them to this high expectation of making sure that not only are our students getting grade level expectations every time that they're walking in the classroom, but our staff know how to adequately deliver that type of instruction. Once we're starting with early literacy, but it's early literacy and beyond. This will expand beyond just our primary age children and going on. And as it expands across the district, we need to have the resources there to be able to do it. This can't be something that we have an expectation without sustainability. Our children are so used to eventful budgeting. So as Nicole Alexander, and I love to quote her out of the University of Minnesota, she says, our budget should reflect what we value. And if we value this and value our students, we should make this our priority. Passing a budget or not passing a budget, but the passing of a budget will be able to help us and really horn in to, in my estimation, with the increased anti-racist work that we want to do and the focusing in on those Black, brown, special needs children and all the other children as well, but definitely the Black and brown special needs children, our ELL children, to give the most marginalized children, it'll give us an increase resources to provide the support that we need to do.
And just to follow up on the professional development and certification portion of the budget, I just wanted to check in maybe with Lisa about who's getting this training and what training are we thinking about doing? Like, have we budgeted enough to make sure that all of our reading teachers who will be involved in the early literacy work, the K-5 literacy work, will be able to take advantage of this professional development?
Chris, that's a really good question. We actually discussed that for about an hour today, right before this meeting. We would actually need to take a phased approach to this work. We would want to start at kindergarten and first grade so that those teachers who were engaging with children at that critical time, teaching them how to read, would be the first group of folks that we would be working with and providing professional development for. We already have 2 schools that really have started this grassroots effort and are actually starting to work through this training and starting to look at some of the new materials. So when we come back soon, we'll be sharing with you some of the work that they're doing and the difference that they're making with students. I would say that part of this double down focus also includes something that the board asks us all the time is, how will you know? Mm-hmm. How do you know, like, what data supports this? What's our compelling why? And then also, how will we know if this investment has been working? What will our staff and what will our staff say? What will we notice and what will we pay attention to and measure moving forward? That's also really important. But Dr. Jenkins is right. This is going to take a concerted effort over multiple years so that we can do the training right. And eventually, I would say this training becomes mandated for all new teachers. It just is that stock PD that we want all of our teachers to have when they start in MMSD. And we want to work with our institutes of higher education to be sure we are connecting with them around what is a high quality licensure program, right? A licensure program that is a 316 or 317 program in the state of Wisconsin. That's a really high quality program that helps teachers diagnose reading difficulties and deeply gives teachers an opportunity to understand and actually do their teaching based on the science of reading, right? Try some things out with children, come back where you're actually learning and teaching children how to read in that professional learning community while you are getting that, that certification. So I hope that helps, Chris.
That helps a lot. And just to reflect back what you said, it sounds like, should the operating referendum pass, we will have funds dedicated every single year to bringing our staff up, training our staff in the science of reading using high quality programming and materials. Is that correct?
That's what we're saying. That's what we were targeting the budgets.
Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Barb, could you go back one slide? I think you jumped ahead to other funding updates.
Oh, wrong way. Yeah. There you
Thank
go.
you.
Chris,
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Jenkins.
just finish on this too. And yes, I know I may have come in talking about this, but I wanted to say to everybody, the science of reading's been in our district. As Lisa mentioned, it was being piloted at 2 schools. But as I've been here and we've been having more discussions with the teachers, because something at this level must be an organic thing that grows out of our teachers understanding the importance of it. And I've received so many emails, I've had so many conversations with current district staff saying, hey, yes, this is the direction that we need to go. We can't do this top down. This has to be something that we believe on at every level, at the teacher level, to the board level, and as a community.
Thanks, Dr. Jenkins. Kelly, I have one last clarification question for you, and that is about if we pass an operating referendum and then we under levy, are we able to use that levy authority in a subsequent year? Like, let's say we only do 4 million next year, and then the biennial budget looks really bad in the 2021-22 school year. Are we able to go back and use some of that unused authority in a later year, or do we lose it if we don't use it now?
Yeah, so it's always a little hard to predict because it's based on a number of formulas, some of which are out of our control. But what I would say is based on our experience from the previous referendum where we under levied, we were not able to kind of roll over the authority and use it in the way you might think, right? It's not necessarily just an add-on to a future revenue authority. So I would say we should not plan on being able to increase the $8 million to $10 million in 21-22 because you under levy here. When you save on your expenses, however, by simply not investing in more, it always makes future years easier to budget and less things you have to cut. So kind of under budgeting would always be a long-term strategy to expenses, and under levying has that benefit to it. But rolling over in a pure sense of thinking about it as 8 million plus 2, I would not count on. It didn't come to fruition the last time.
That's really helpful. Thank you. All right, so process from this point, I'd like to open it up just for general questions. And after that, I want to go around again and get specific feedback just on a few pieces that Kelly needs from us so she can go back and build the budget. So again, I can't see everybody, but if you have a question, just let me know and I'll call on you. I am not seeing any. That's amazing. Okay. Before we start talking about specifics, I wanted to just remind everybody quickly how we got to that $16 million in savings. 3 million of that came from increasing our class sizes to optimal +1 in the class size policy. 10 million of that came out of staff compensation by freezing steps and budgeting base wage increase at 0%. 2.5 million of that came from putting a lot of strategic equity projects on hold. And additionally, the $1.5 million we have in savings, as we've talked about, 1 million of that came from changing our healthcare plan design so that not all but most of our staff are paying more out of pocket for healthcare. So of that 16 million, 10 million of cuts plus 1 million of savings came directly from things that impact our staff. So with that in mind, Kelly, please tell me if this is adequate for the feedback that you're looking for. I'm going to go around and I'm going to ask people first to tell us what you're thinking about steps. Should we put steps in a non-passing budget? Should we do one semester of steps? Should we do full year of steps being replaced? A whole year of steps is about $5 million. A semester of steps is about half that, or $2.5 million. The second piece of feedback for a passing referendum is, do you think we should budget for the full $6 million, or do you think we should go for an under levy? And then the third piece is just, do you have any other comments about anything else that's in either the passing or the non-passing budget? So steps, and I guess I'd add the steps, just compensation in general in the passing referendum. We don't have steps built in here, and we aren't talking about base wage rate tonight. But if you feel like we need to build base wage into the passing referendum, please say that. We can talk about that much. So compensation, steps, generally base wage. The second part is, do we levy to the full 6 million, or do you think we should under levy? And the third part is any additional comments about any of the expenditures that Kelly has laid out in either budget. Kelly, does that get you what you need?
Yes, no, and everyone should know we have more conversations to come in October, particularly on the passing budget side, if you budget for the full 6 million. I just need to kind of get enough to get moving on this budget so I can be ready for you in the October conversation.
Thanks, Kelly. All right, Ollie, what are you thinking? And I know there's stuff you can't talk about, so.
Thank you very much. In order to navigate my conflict of interest individually and with integrity, I will not speak to steps and lanes, and I won't speak to base wage increase as my partner is employed by the district. I will speak to the passing referendum and the importance of the passing referendum. I want to thank Dr. Jenkins and Kelly Ruppel for speaking with such enthusiasm about what we will be able to accomplish given the support of our community. And we can in no way take for granted our community support. This is something we're asking for at this time, but the ability to pursue full day 4K and to overall improve education in Madison is an incredible opportunity. And I think it's tempting in a moment like this to really be afraid to invest forward. However, that's how communities have survived really challenging moments in the past. That's how people made it out of the Great Depression. They invested in one another and the things they believe in and cared about, and strengthened their communities in the process. So really giving our young people and our educators the opportunity to prosper in the passing budget is something I'm incredibly excited about, and I'm deeply grateful for the work of the team to prepare this today. I do think that it's important that we levy to the full amount in the passing referendum. I think having that 1.9 million as kind of the unanticipated cost of COVID is a really responsible thing to do. And I think that we can navigate this pandemic with a great deal of agility and intelligence while, really allowing for the taxpayers to know that we are using every possible resource to support our young people and our educators and our schools. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks, Ollie. And I forgot to mention earlier, but I believe that the cost to taxpayers on an average home, if we levy the full 6 million in the passing operating referendum, is about $60. Is that correct, Kelly?
So the way we've been talking about the operating piece, yeah, that's about right. And the mill rate over the 4 years is 96 cents. So the way we've been talking about it is that for kind of every $100,000 in home value, it's $27 per year. So that $60 is more at the per $100,000 of home value. That's not the average kind of home. and in the materials on our website, and there's a calculator there, so someone can go in and plug in their home value and see what the operating referendum impact would be on them personally based on their home value, both on kind of operating and facilities. So that's on the website too.
So basically, to sum that up, the $6.5 million that's in the non-passing budget comes at no cost to taxpayers. There's no levy increase because it's coming out of increased property values. And the additional $6 million in a passing budget cost the average homeowner about $60.
So just, I want to be careful on the wording. We talk about mill rate because mill rates per $1,000 in home value. We can't predict what's going to happen to any one person's individual home values. And that's because the city assesses like in like neighborhoods. So if you happen to be in a neighborhood whose assessed value goes up in that 1 year, your taxes are going to go up kind of regardless of our mill rate changes, right? So I can't say whether your individual taxes are going to go up because Ananda's might go down. It's largely dependent on the assessed value based on the city's kind of cycle that it goes through. On a mill rate basis, the mill rate is not projected to go up because our property base is growing. And that's the same for the non-passing referendum and the passing referendum. The difference is by the time you layer in that next 6 million, it kind of ticked us over that $0 number. So the 6 million is the mill rate is going to increase and no longer sit at that $0. So for every $1,000 in home value, your property taxes will go up because of the referendum, because it's now outweighed the impact of the increase of the overall property value at the moment you add that next 6 million in. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Kelly. That's really helpful, and I appreciate your clarifying what I said. Your statement was far more accurate, so thank you. Ananda, what are you thinking? So compensation.
I'll go last, Chris. Thank you.
You'll go last. Okay. Chris Gummerschmidt.
Yes, if we could go back to the previous slide that has the non-passing and has those different scenarios in there. Yeah. My question, I guess, is having just joined the board in April, what was the base wage decision that the board made last year? Given the scenario we were in.
Mm-hmm.
And last year's steps were just included, is that correct?
Yep, last year's steps were budgeted right out of the gate, and the board did fund base wage to the maximum allowable kind of by law by the time we were done with the budgeting process.
Okay, which was what percent? I mean, looking at these percentages.
2.14.
Okay.
Testing my memory, but I am testing 2.14 is right.
Nick is talking, but she's muted. But I think you're right. 2.144. I think. Is that right, Nikki?
Thank you, Nikki.
It's either 2.144 or 2.41, but I think it's 2.144.
That's right. Thank you, Nikki.
Based on my memory.
Yep.
Okay. And as we look at this funding the steps and funding the base wage, which one of the two sort of covers more employees? Is there one that reaches more people? I mean, as you're looking at the different options here?
Yeah, Deirdre, I want to give Deirdre a chance to kind of jump in as we get into the nitty gritty on the comp side. But typically base wage covers everybody. Or base wage does cover everybody. And then the step schedule is dependent kind of on which step table you're on. It covers most everybody, but not quite everybody. Deirdre, do you have anything more to add on that?
I was wrong. It's 2.44.
Oh,
I looked it up.
thank you, Nikki.
I looked it up on my notes. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, Kelly, I would say that's spot on. Our base wage is going to cover all staff, and steps and lanes cover most. We do have some folks that are sort of capped out or maxed out on their step advancement. So if you were going with one base wage is going to be the one that captures everybody.
Okay, thanks. That helps. And then in talking about those unknowns, I know you've been doing a really good job, Kelly, of keeping track of all the COVID expenses as they've been coming in and how the funding that we can apply for. Do you have any best guess on how much, like, you have, the available unknowns, the COVID response, like how much we might need for that going forward? Is there any way to best guess that? There may not be.
Well, I mean, I think it ultimately depends on what kind of decisions the board wants to make. And so it's sort of, I mean, it obviously is a number that tops out. But if the board wants to redo HVAC systems at 50 schools, you're in the millions and millions of dollars, right? If the board wants to extend the school year next year because kids are back in session and we want more days in the calendar, it's a $2 million per day decision. So like the numbers can add up fast if really big decisions are being made. Those aren't even contemplated based on the budget, that we have available. I did a kind of back of the envelope comparison to a couple different districts and, some of the numbers they were putting out in comparison to ours. And I keep coming down to like really, it's probably somewhere around $12 to $13 million of which we would want between now and rolling in through next summer to get a real summer school strategy moving, hopefully with kids in person. And what we get out of the federal funding, is about $9 million. And then you take away the private school piece of that, which decreases it a bit. So we're going to be short in the grand scheme of things. We have what we need for this moment in time, but the needs. I mean, you could ask a teacher. Every teacher would like a document camera right now. I mean, that would be $1 million in a blink, right? So it's a really tough decision making based on the money that we have. And every decision, trying to make the best value of every individual dollar. But certainly schools would like access to more direct COVID funding for more immediate problem solving on the ground. As would, Chad Weezy could spend multi-millions of dollars in just continuing to try to get our schools more healthy, more safe. And that's largely just because of a deferred maintenance problem we've had without COVID.
Yeah, I get it. Nikki, did you have a question that related to that in the middle? I just saw your hand up.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody can, I don't know.
I actually do, if I may. Chair, may I answer? May I ask or state that?
Yeah, go ahead.
It was more of a clarification less than a question, because I recall from our documents last year that over 400 of our staff didn't get a base wage increase or did not get a steps and lanes increase or a base wage increase. Am I misremembering that? If so, please, Kelly, could you update me because I cannot remember.
Yeah, Deirdre, come on back if you like. But everyone would have gotten a base wage increase. There's not 400 employees that didn't get a base wage increase.
I knew I remembered something wrong. I just couldn't remember what.
Yeah, that conversation was about the step schedule. And as Deirdre said, there are some employees who've just topped out. We have multiple schedules depending on the union and kind of the type, and they've been negotiated over 70 years. So there's multiple schedules that we balance. Some have different rules, processes around steps that were just negotiated in over time, so they're different. And so I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. Deirdre would have to weigh in on that, but there are some who do not get a step.
Yeah, the story in my head, thank you, Nikki, for bringing that up. The story in my head is that there was a particular units that were differently impacted by steps and lanes, and in particular, the units where the SSAs are located, which is what we started having the conversations about, changing the compensation structure for the SSAs.
So depending on where you are, that is correct. There are some folks that have maxed out, as Kelly has said. There are other folks that if you look at their salary schedule, depending on the year, they may not have moved on that particular year. but everybody gets a base wage increase. And so for those that have maxed out, we're looking at about 70, 75 roughly employees that would be in that category.
Okay. So Chris, let's go back to you.
Yeah, I guess just looking at how the steps and the base wage different scenarios fit together, I feel like if we go full steps, it's sort of less, I mean, just looking at the 6.3 million that we're balancing here, it doesn't give us a lot of flexibility in the base wage. So, but I'd be interested to hear what other of my board colleagues think on that part. And then for the passing and the scenarios, Barb, I guess if you could go to the next slide. Yeah, I want to say how much I really appreciate this focus and the urgency around the investing in the early literacy piece. I think it's really important that we're not only investing in the actual curriculum and reading materials, but that we are investing in this professional development for our staff around the science of reading. And so I am excited about this. I'm really excited about all of these priority investments that we're talking about. You know, the special ed transitions and the at-risk youth, getting those off of the not as stable funding sources. And then looking at the elementary school and the middle school facility maintenance. I went back in reviewing some of the referenda information and just looking at the facilities conditions reports for all of our schools. I just think that's an investment that we need to make along the way as far as upgrading our facilities. So yeah, I think they're all really important, and I appreciate the work that has gone into getting us here.
Chris, did you have any thoughts about whether we levied the full amount or under levy?
You know, I'm just joining this conversation, and I missed the decision-making point on the levy decision in March. You know, I would be open to that. I'm really aware of the economic hardship that this pandemic is putting on a lot of people in our community. So I do have a concern around that. And so, yeah, I would be open to a discussion on that. I understand the importance of investing in the COVID needs that our schools are going to have too. I mean, just the expenses that Kelly started to list of what's coming ahead of us is important to consider too.
All right, Gloria, what are your thoughts?
So I guess I'm going to be a bearer of bad news here. So this is unlike last year. And I'm really concerned in the non-passing in doing anything on base wage and step schedule movement. I think that we are asking our residents in the city for a referenda and additional funds, and for us to even think about adding base wage at this moment is just, I see it challenging. I mean, we are in a difficult financial situation, and I don't think we should be planning base wage and step at this moment in time, particularly during a non-passing, right? I just don't, I think we're going to have to make, this is the year, every year we talk about this. We are in a difficult financial situation. We talk about base wage and steps every year. This is, if it's a non-passing budget, we're going to have to make some really difficult decisions, and something needs to give. That does not mean I don't support our teachers, our staff. What it means is that we have to, as a board, going to have to make some challenging decisions and figure out how we best invest in our most vulnerable students and families who, during this difficult time that we are losing, that are worse off than they were before. And I think, you know, my question is, why, I think Kelly, if you could explain why we would even, why the 4.5 at this moment in time? I mean, as a recommendation. I know you gave us several scenarios, but in scenario B,
Barb, could you go back a slide for me?
you've included the base wage 4.5 with no step schedule movement and no passing.
So there's no recommendations in this particular slide. Want to
Okay.
be clear on that. I'm trying to give you your range of possibility.
Okay.
Right. So we all agreed in the previous slide that $6.3 million was the revenue of which you had available to spend.
Yeah.
Knowing that the main conversation this board wants to have is compensation. I'm kind of giving you the parameters of which you can spend $6.3 million. If you want to under levy, I think that conversation goes to the previous slide, which would be not building in the 179 at all and not collecting the taxes at all. And then that would drop the property taxes, and that would be an under levy on a non-passing budget. We can do that. I just, based on the previous conversation, don't think that's where this full board is at, or it would have been on the previous slide, or it would have been the discussion in the previous slide. So with 6.3 million available to spend, these would be some options on compensation.
And that's with a passing.
This is the non-passing budget slide right here.
This one right here is a non-passing, but the 6.3 in the revenue forecast, that is not necessarily based on a passing or a non-passing.
That is based on the non-passing. That's the revenue available in the per pupil that's in the budget today, of which was approved last July.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. So I still feel that, you know, at this point in time, not knowing whether a referenda is going to pass or not, to make decisions on base wage or step. That's where I'm at. And I think the levy,
so that's the next slide, Barbara.
Yeah.
Forward.
And that's the passing. So I'm good with that.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments just in general on the what's been presented in the two expenditure slides, Gloria?
No, I think that I love I really do like the sense of urgency around early literacy. I really like that focus. And as usual, I you know, the at-risk youth, I think that is, you know, when I first saw it, it's just not enough. But I think if that's what we have, that's what we have. I think we need to continue to invest in our at-risk youth, and put more funding into that area. But I'm good with that amount for now.
It would be an area that future referendum funding in the passing referendum would be an area that I think this team would like to come back to the board and revisit for sure our investments into the at-risk youth, not just to micro schools, is the reason I wrote, et cetera. We have a number of programs, right, that we want to come back and talk to. And so that would for sure be part of the 21-22 conversation with a passing referendum.
Thank you, Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
Julia, I'm so sorry. I forgot to call on you during the discussion about revenue. Please give us your thoughts on revenue and expenditures.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
And we can.
Sorry, I think I'm having a problem with my internet.
Can you speak a little more loudly?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Julia, if you're talking, we can't hear you. Barb, do you know if we lost her or?
I'm looking, Chris, 1 second.
Yeah, I don't see her.
I don't either.
Yep, I think she, technology issue.
Technology. Well, while we wait for her to come back, Savian, did you have any comments?
Yeah, so thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chris, for this. When we go to compensation for a non-passing budget, this is really not an ideal scenario for anyone. So just to keep our flexibility, I'd be interested in keeping, total compensation somewhere between 0 and 3 million, depending on how base wage negotiation goes, and what we can do with the step schedule the second semester. So some combination of those to keep total comp between 0 and 3 million. I will say step schedule, when we're talking about trying to improve the quality of teaching with regard to reading, that is a way to incentivize further certification. So I will say that when it comes to the passing referenda budget, I do want to thank Dr. Jenkins for and Lisa's focus on early literacy, and especially speaking to reading as a human right. When we look at the data and see the correlation between functional illiteracy and a host of other outcomes down the line, whether it's becoming incarcerated, getting ensnarled in the juvenile justice system, or being employed, it is very important that we hone in on that. I've been talking about full day 4K since I joined the board. I think it is one of the smartest investments we can take in terms of getting to root cause of issues that our students are experiencing, whether it is reading, high school graduation, or behavioral health, especially with trauma-informed care instruction in full day 4K. Very excited about that, and I think we have a good case to make for the referendum. I do think that the way that we have structured the debt with the referenda, thanks to Kelly, so that we minimize the impact on the taxpayer in the first year or so. I do think we have the flexibility to levy to the max there. So.
Thanks, Savian. I know Nikki. Nikki, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Because Ananda asked to go last as well. So here's the thing. I want to fund base wage to the max. I always want to fund base wage to the max. You know me. Everyone on this board knows me. Everyone knows where I stand on this issue. However, steps and lanes happen to be more important in this particular budget in this particular time. There are people who get a base wage increase of 37 cents. There are some who get much more than that. But steps and lanes provides that we still get quality teachers and we don't lose teachers who have done everything right, who have actually followed not just the rules, but thought outside the box, who've been unique. And we will lose them if we cut steps and lanes. And that's a loss I don't want to take. And the reason I don't want to take is this. I understand it's a tight budget year. I understand it's tight financially. I also know that that we have a $16 million surplus, and obviously that is due to good budgeting, and thank you very much. But when almost 10 million could come from staff, I do worry. I do worry about the message we're sending. I do worry about the message we have about longevity and who we are retaining. I think what we need to do is to, one, on a separate note, create a memo of understanding with the union on not firing teachers of color. That would be choice number one, even though that's not on the table. I'm going to put it in there anyway. And number two, I want scenario D. I need the full steps and lanes funded. And most importantly, the teachers I've talked to this year, and interesting on the document camera, a lot wanted it, but I've seen more teachers come up with the most unique document cameras using rocks, stones, glass, and I admire the ingenuity. I admire the ability to do that. Problem is, some of them can't afford all the supplies they need either, and they get that and they're willing to work on that. But if we take away their steps and lanes and their ability to advance, I think we'll lose them completely, and I think we'll be a weaker district for it. That's my view. I know it's probably contrary to many people, but that's where I'm at. But I appreciate the respectful discussion.
Nikki, where do you land on the levy and a passing referendum?
On steps and lanes, I want to fund it on both. And as for the levy, I don't believe in under levying. We can't. It was shown last time that we can't use the money. I was on the board last time with that. And that doesn't work. And I think we owe it to our schools. The only area I would cut, honest to God, would be on maintenance of the Holzman building, because I don't believe in the separate facility. That's a personal opinion, and that comes out of fund balance anyway, so I don't have much choice over it.
Thanks, Nikki. Since Ananda, you wanted to go last, I'll go next. And if Barb, let us know if Julia pops up again in the waiting room.
Will do.
So when it comes to the tax levy, I believe we need to levy to the full amount. Kelly, I think you did a really nice job with structuring the operating referendum. So the impact to taxpayers right now is not going to be intense. And at the same time, I would hate to lose that levy authority in the coming biennial or in the coming fiscal year, when the biennial budget could be brutal. So I think we should levy to the maximum amount we can in the first year. If it turns out the biennial budget is not brutal, we have the option to under levy in the coming school year. So not in 21-22. I share everybody's enthusiasm for the strategic equity investments in the passing budget. We have to do it. Like, there's so much good stuff in there. Dr. Jenkins, I really appreciate your filling us in on kind of the long view on where we're headed with reading, and particularly professional development for our staff. When I reached out to staff across the district and talked to them about reading instruction, I heard loud and clear that professional development on the science of reading and evidence-based reading instruction to them was almost more important than the materials we choose, because once they know how to do science-based instruction, they can make materials work. So I think we're really headed in the right direction there. And thank you so much to everybody for your work on that. In either, in the non-passing budget or the passing budget, I firmly believe we need to fully fund steps for the whole year. We, basically saved 11 million of $16 million by not funding our staff at all. And without staff, we don't have a school district. I think we need to put the steps back even in the non-passing budget. I think we also need to consider base wage, because some of our staff don't get steps and lanes, particularly, steps and lanes to me is a way to ensure that staff who are early in the salary schedule, particularly new hires and staff of color, get the compensation that comes early in that salary schedule. We several years ago weighted the salary schedule towards the first 7 or 8 years that somebody works in the district, specifically as a way to try to retain educators of color who are just starting out here. And I'm worried that if we take away steps or even cut steps in half, we're taking away that incentive for newer staff of color to stay here and work here. And the flip side of that is, I think if we don't do some base wage for staff who've been here so long, they've maxed out the salary schedule, we're not giving them anything to stay, and their experience matters. Likewise, for the few staff and units who don't fall on a step schedule, we want to make sure that they're getting some compensation, because pretty much every staff group, except for administrators who are already paying into their health insurance, are now paying more into their health insurance. So to our staff, it feels like a pay cut. And I know lots of people are taking pay cuts right now with furloughs and job losses, but at the same time, our staff are working really, really hard to get virtual learning up and running. I looked at a study out of the UW-Madison Business School today, which was focused on physicians who are shifting to telemedicine. And the study found that physicians are working almost double what they used to work with the inclusion of telemedicine in their jobs. Now we're talking, MMSD is not the healthcare profession, but one of the reasons that physicians are working double, I think, is a situation we're in with our teachers, and that nobody else can do their job. You can't look at the workflow of the physician and say, we'll have these 3 other support people or administrators take over their workflow, because you need the physician to work one-on-one with the patient. Likewise, we can't take the work that our teachers do and look at the extra work they're doing virtual learning and outsource it or give it to somebody else's workflow, because teachers are the ones who have to teach. And I really feel that at least fully funding the STEP schedule, and even in a non-passing budget, acknowledges that not only do we want to continue with our equity strategy of trying to invest in staff of color who are early in the STEP schedule, but also let all of our staff know that we really recognize the extra work they're putting in this year to make virtual learning happen, to adapt to a hybrid model when and if that happens, and putting the STEP schedule back in. It's 5 million of the 10 million we basically cut from compensation, and that feels fair to me. So in a passing budget, I would also like to look at putting some base wage back in. So Ananda, you're next.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Kelly, for laying out the scenarios, and again for the ability to illustrate to us a sense of how to be creative in a really challenging year. In regards to the levy, I agree with comments of some of my colleagues, and Chris, I think, explained that extremely well. I think I have said that before. I was looking to even a greater amount of asking earlier, but I feel comfortable where we're landing based on the fact that so many people in our community are being impacted by the current economic state and future economic state. In regards to compensation in general, I agree that workers need to be compensated. Workers needed raises. Workers need some of our staff are single head of households. Some of our staff are the sole providers of some of the households. However, I feel that we're in the space of having to make some really tough choices. I wanted to think creatively around guaranteeing stipends and lanes, but being more conservative in regards to base wage, or some combination of concessions in those areas. I like the thinking around the second semester stepping lanes, as well as I know I was one of the staff that got impacted by the second semester strategy in the past. I think that would give us a little bit more time to kind of see the full impact of COVID. We have not just in our budget, but in our entire community. I think some of you have asked, I think Chris Schmidt, you were asked what's the tally for COVID right now? And every time I have conversation with Callie, I ask where we are with that tally. I think that it's at this point, we have a small sense of what that looks like. We might get into a much dire situation coming up, and I feel that is irresponsible for us to make a lot of assumptions. And to me, and we made a vote in regards to the health insurance that could have saved us more money. To me, I think it's a matter of, do we go on and continue to make decisions regarding budget like nothing else is happening, and then wait until we end up having to lay off a lot of people? Or do we say, hey, everyone, we are in this really stressful moment beyond our control. We don't have a good sense of the scope and the extent, the impact of COVID, and the economic impact in our community. let's just hold on a minute until we kind of get a better sense in order to make sure that we guaranteeing everybody a job. I think that is where we are at, and thinking through those lenses, I wanted to be really conservative in regards to compensation. And balance making some decisions that still demonstrates that, yes, people needed to have an adjustment of compensations. There was one more question, Chris, and I can't remember which one it was. It was Levy, and you are muted.
If you have any general feedback about other items in either the non-passing or the passing budget.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to think about the non-passing at this point, just because of where we are. But I really appreciate the other items, and the entire time that we're having the presentation is to thinking about the items that we cannot think about right now, right? My daughter is a senior at East, and I can see like some teachers have already adapted or are just in well, and some teachers are still learning how to use Zoom or how to share screen, or those are real things that are happening, and that is going to impact our students and are going to impact the students of color and students that are English learners and students with IEPs. Oh my goodness, special ed right now, it's a mess because nobody knows, like there's no fair and just recommendation right now because of where we are, right? Like we're trying to tell staff to go and work with the kids that cannot be doing virtual learning, but then at the same time, that is making them risk, for their own safety. I think there's so many things that we don't know yet. And so I really appreciate the list of recommendations. I can see myself supporting many of them. I do think that there is an unknown algorithm in there that we cannot pretend that it's not there.
Thanks, Ananda. It looks like we have not got Julia back, so I will just summarize what I just heard.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I did hear from Julia. She's still having major problems with internet. She's sorry that she can't be here, but she said she'll share her thoughts on the budget and virtual learning when it comes up for voting.
Fantastic. Thanks, Barb.
Yep.
So I heard pretty clearly, not 100%, but most people felt pretty comfortable with going with the full levy if we pass the operating referendum. I also heard pretty clearly that most people are excited about the strategic equity investments in the passing budget, and that most people are thinking we need to make sure we're able to be agile in the face of COVID with things we just don't know right now. What I did not hear any consensus on is staff compensation. I heard a couple voices say there's concern about any kind of base wage or step increase, that they'd rather keep funds flexible for other uses. I heard two people say that they're comfortable with possibly 1 semester steps, but not 2 semester steps. And two voices say full steps and maybe some base wage on top of that, or maybe full base wage on top of that. Kelly, I'm gonna maybe we can work on this one together. So
yeah, actually that's what I was gonna recommend, Chris. It might be that maybe Gloria, you and I and Dr. Jenkins take some of what we heard offline and get ready for how it all relates to our closed session conversation. And I'll just maybe put my ask out there to make sure that meeting happens sooner rather than later, that closed session conversation about base wage as it plays into the overall strategy. But I think maybe that's my recommendation at this point, but I'm happy to take other recommendations for sure.
Chris, and I just wanted to add, I mean, I think, my concern is obviously planning for base wage in a non-passing, right? That's my concern, right? I think that in a passing, I'm in support, but the uncertainty, of where we're at financially is just really uncomfortable for me to actually commit to base wage at this time in a non-passing.
And Gloria, I think earlier you said the same thing about steps.
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure that was clear. Does anybody else have thoughts about moving forward? We do have another operations work group meeting as well as time in between. And we will be in closed session at some point in between the two meetings to talk about base wage. All right, I think we can go on, Kelly, thanks.
All right, I'm gonna get through the next couple of slides pretty quickly, because I think we've had the majority of the meat of the conversation that we do need to have. Barbara, if you wouldn't mind pulling those slides back up and moving on to the next one. This is when I update you on some of the things we do know. So I know we all could use a little certainty in our life. We have received our title allocations. When you saw them back in June, they were all estimates. These are all final. The main piece to know here is that the title did drop just a little bit more, about $70,000 more than we had previously suggested. So we knew we were gonna lose quite a bit on title, and so we did lose what we expected, and even just a little bit more. That is balanced in the overall budget. It was part of our work back in June, and we'll pick up that last $70,000 that we lost in the overall budget by October. All the other titles remained really right where we thought they would be, within a handful of dollars. So those estimates have not changed much since June. We talked in June about the reasons why the title lost. So I'm not going to repeat that conversation now. But if you want to revisit it, please reach out to Lisa and I. We're happy to have that conversation. On the next slide, we talk about the COVID, the overall CARES Act funding, and how it's currently kind of being allocated within our draft budget. As you can see, we have to take about $900,000 and kind of put it on hold for our private school designation. That's category E there. I just want to tackle that one first. And we'll be holding that until we have our final private school Supreme Court ruling about how those funds will be allocated. It is possible that we'll get some of that back. So we'll keep our fingers crossed on those kind of final rulings and what DPI has to say about it. But now it's kind of in a holding box. Other than that, so then it's about $8 million in total that we're kind of allocating once you take the private schools out. You'll see about 1.7 million specifically tied to instructional needs, special education students, ELL learners, and our curriculum and virtual learning kind of needs on the instructional side of the house. A large chunk of it in facilities. This is where your plexiglass will start to show up in your front secretary spaces, your nursing offices that need to be kind of remodeled and designed to be aligned with this work. That's where you'll see a lot of that type of work. Health, emotional safety. This is where our thermometers would come from the health safety, but on the emotional safety, mental health needs of our students, kind of well aware of those additional needs. And social work counselor additional hours and work in there as well. On the technology side, our devices, you'll have a consent memo at the end of the month for some of our lost and damaged devices from spring that were not returned. Those are the type of things that would come under the technology side of the house, but this will also include Wi-Fi data packages and getting Wi-Fi access to our students. So those are some of the examples that come out of each of those individual funds. The October budget will have a bigger spreadsheet built out for some of the examples, but overall, this is where our funding aligns. So in the next group, our last kind of slide, this is where we wrap up all those other pieces. Fund 50 budget, we've gone back, forth, upside down, and inside out on this particular budget, thanks to moving parts at the federal level. At this point, we have received some of the exemptions that we needed at the federal level, projecting about a $1.5 million loss that we'll use fund balance to balance within the Fund 50 fund balance. Also use some of the CARES Act funding to transfer over. Our goal overall is to avoid a need to transfer funds from the Fund 10 to balance Fund 50. The reason for that is that just builds us a bigger gap hole in our Fund 10, which is where we want to be supporting students with. So goal, close that balance by using CARES Act funding and Fund 50's overall fund balance. Fund 80, we're aiming for a 0% levy increase to manage the overall levy coming out of our Fund 80, and we'll use CARES Act funding in support of that and the programs that we're running out of MSCR tied to COVID response, primarily the $1.5 million in expenses estimated to be tied to childcare. And last but not least, we have an assigned fund balance this year, and that assigned fund balance is those deferred kind of expenses coming out of the 1920 school year. Nikki, this ties directly to your earlier question and the reason why I wanted to hold your question. So I'm going to aim to answer it here. So at the end of the 1920 school year, we did end the year with about a $9 million fund balance in the positive. That is good news for us. There's a couple reasons as to why we got there. One of the reasons is what we knew would happen. We had deferred expenses, expenses that did not happen in the spring because we put a purchasing hold in place. Those deferred expenses kind of look on this as the assigned fund balance, what we call building carryover. That's $1.3 million that schools typically would spend in school formula funding that we promised schools in the spring we would roll over and make available to them as budgets on top of the budgets they would traditionally receive in a school year. So that $1.3 million is entirely allocated out to schools right now, kind of as we speak through those COVID decisions we made in the spring. So that's a piece of it. We did get some savings out of utilities, like we thought we would, and some savings out of transportation. We negotiated those transportation savings, right? So we knew some of those savings were coming. But in addition to that, we have rollover funds every single year, things that go to fund balance because the projects happen in June in Chad Weezy's world, and the bills hit in July because we do the work over the summer, right? Traditionally, in the way we operate. So the safety and security money that you see on the screen, the TID 25 project schedule, the TID sources for Holtzman, those are funding sources that fell to fund balance that make up that $8.5 million that we assigned to fund balance, assigned, that's a technical accounting term, so that we use it this year. It's how we manage these two budget cycles that we're kind of always operating in between our end of year and a new year start, right? So what we did do then is we took $1 million out of the overall savings, largely that transportation and utility savings I mentioned, and budgeted into assigned for COVID-19. We did that so that we had the funding we needed, because I already mentioned we were kind of short on what we needed for COVID. So we took the savings that we got out of utilities and transportation from 1920, budgeting it into 2021 as COVID-19 assigned, meaning we saved the money in 1920 because of COVID. We're going to spend it on the needs that we have tied to expenses that we have in 2021. So that's what assigned fund balance is. It's explained kind of in kind of memo I gave to the board, but it'll show up in the budget book and it'll be budgeted and spent in 2021 kind of as planned. We'll be watching that COVID money very, very closely throughout the school year. And in January, if we have departments that aren't using it, or if we overestimated needs, we will revisit all of the COVID budgets to make sure the money gets to exactly where they need in the December, early January timeframe before second semester starts, and when we know more about when kids are in play. So I hope I have answered your questions. I think I am at the end, other than the timeline, which is just to make sure we're all on the same page. Tonight, we got some good advice from you. I've got a follow-up item with Chris, Gloria, and Dr. Jenkins and Deirdre moving forward. And we'll go into closed session with the board to discuss base wage, hopefully the earlier part of the week of September 21st. We'll start negotiations with MTI, hopefully the week of September 28th, should schedules align. We come back to you then by the October operation work group. Our base wage negotiation process should be done. By then, we will rebalance. We will rebalance our enrollment. rebalance our aid estimates that we will get. We may not have general aid by October 12th. That usually comes on October 15th. So we may still be using estimates by the time we meet in October for that meeting. But by the time we get to the October 26th meeting, you have a budget book in hand, and you will be voting on two budgets, a passing budget and a non-passing budget, based on some of the guidance we have tonight and the guidance we reconfirm on October 12th. Whew. Okay, we're done. Chris, it's yours.
Thanks, Kelly. Are there any final comments or questions? Nikki.
My only final comment is I thank my board members for having such a good and serious discussion tonight. My only comment is on steps and lanes. I think it's more necessity for our staff to show we value them. And I think that's why I fought as much as I did. I hope I did not offend anyone.
Thanks, Nikki. Any other final comments? Kelly, I'll jump in with a question about fund balance. First of all, I want to thank you for the work you've done the past couple of years. We've rolled over, or we've added fund balance to the maximum amount allowed in our policy, the 15% the past couple of years, which put us in a really good place to get a good interest rate on our loan this year. And so I want to show you some appreciation for that. I think that leaves us, if I read your memo correctly, with 61 million in unassigned fund balance right now. And of course, most of that needs to stay there because it's not a checking account. It's money we use to maintain our cash flow between the start of the school year and the time that we actually get our revenue from the state. But in an emergency, if COVID expenses ended up being much higher than we budgeted for, do we have some flexibility in the fund balance for one-time expenditures that could be related to COVID or related to safety in general of our buildings? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so definitely a one-time, right? One-time source of fundings need to tie to one-time expenses. So thank you for saying that. You do, from a board policy perspective, would have some room to budget that in. Now, making that decision later on in the year based on when a need may arrive could trigger the need for the board to revote on the budget, depending on kind of the dollar amounts you're talking about. And that type of budget would need a majority of the board members to pass per state statute. So it's possible. Just know that there is state statute about approving a budget past the October line that it intentionally kind of makes it a little harder to pass. So that's out there. If the board wanted to assign fund balance prior to the October vote, increase that $1 million to more, we could do that. That would be a conversation we could have. I would be careful on going too far, of course, because we wouldn't want to risk our credit ratings and other things on the flip end. So I would be cautious in that, but you technically could.
So just to tease that out a little bit more, if we say wanted to build in $2 million of fund balance and then we didn't spend it, that money stays in fund balance, correct? Like it doesn't. And but we don't have to go back and revote if we decide we need it.
Correct.
And like, what's an amount that you think we could safely, if we decided we needed it, build into the budget and not affect our credit rating and not affect our financial standing as a district?
I would ask you for a little more time for me to think about that and calculate that.
I think it'd be really helpful to have that information as we move into the October operations work group meeting, just in case we decide we need a little additional flexibility based on where we see things headed with instruction and the pandemic this year. So,
Can we get a copy of that statute?
Yeah, Sherry, are you on the line?
Yep.
Okay, we'll take it as a to-do.
All right. Well, Kelly, thank you so much. This was a really important conversation. I want to thank my fellow board members.
Chris, I'm really sorry, but I did actually want to ask Kelly a question.
Sorry, yeah.
Last portion we just saw. So Kelly, going back to the slide that was specific to our non-instrumentality charters, is that, are we seeing the increase based in the new non-instrumentality charter, or are we seeing increase across the board in terms of our non-instrumentality charters, looking at enrollment and expense?
Increase across the board. Primarily because our two larger charter, 2X charters are in their growth patterns. We obviously haven't seen their enrollment yet, and being COVID, everybody's trends are off. So I don't quite know where they're going to fall, which is a big open question for me that I won't know until mid-October. Democratic Milestone, our new 2X charter, had a newspaper article on it recently, which indicated that their enrollment was not where they were projecting to be, was short on that. So that could very well help us in the overall numbers. But I haven't seen any indications of our two others. But in general, their growth patterns are such that their enrollment is increasing, which means our expenses are going up for funding that out the door. And the schools that are eligible for Title I do pull from our overall Title I pot, which is one of the reasons Title I is dropping, but definitely not the only.
Thank you for speaking to that.
Yep.
So now that I can see everybody, are there any final comments or questions? All right, well, thank you to everybody for just a very respectful and organized conversation, and for your candid, thoughtful views on the decisions we need to make. And Kelly, thank you so much for all the work you put into this.
Thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate all of you. And Barb and Chris, which item is up next to our agenda? I just want to make sure that the team is set to go.
Our next agenda item is discussing the potential building purchase. So
it is. All right. I can have Chad, Weezy, and Andrew.
Should we take a 5-minute stretch break?
Please.
And sitting for a couple hours.
Yes, but please try to be back in 5 minutes. That would be 7:17, because we want to keep moving, and I think the next two items won't take as long. So, all right, see y'all in 5 minutes. Oh, we just got through one agenda item. Barb, are you there?
Major election decision. The Green Party, the Supreme Court ruled the Green Party is not eligible for the ballot. Ballots can now be mailed.
Yes, I'm here, Chris.
I think we've got a quorum and we can get going again.
Okay.
Yep. All right, welcome back, everybody. Our next agenda item is talking about a potential property purchase.
All right. This is one of the more exciting parts of my entire year. So let me try to pull up the energy that I actually completely feel about the project we're about to present to you.
Please don't. We could use some of that positivity right now.
Right. So let me do my best to scrape for and show you what I actually feel about the work that we're about to present to you, but also the amazing partnership that kind of ensues behind this work with Rooted and Joe Sensenbrenner taking the kind of board lead and Marcia's executive director lead and their opening comments. In addition to that, Andrew Statz, Chad Weezy, and Mike Herding and Sherry have been really at the negotiation table for 6 to 8 months now, getting us to where we are today, which is we are thrilled to present to you 3 documents that are in your packet today, which together make up the terms of agreement that we have gotten to in negotiations with Rooted to purchase, contingent on a passing referendum, the property at 501 East Badger Rock Road, which is the building that Badger Rock Middle School currently resides in and the beautiful lands on which that school sits. Chad, our team has been looking at potential properties on the south side since the referendum discussions began to try to make sure that there was even property available to build on a building before we could ever bring forward to the board a possibility of this elementary school on the south side coming to fruition. And we've come so far that I'm just really thrilled to introduce these documents to you and to the community as you consider this land and building purchase for $6.4 million contingent on the passing of the referendum. As it relates to this particular purchase price, we do have our realtor, Andy, here on Zoom with us. He'll come on board if you need any questions. So I want to make sure you know he is in the room with us. But we did a full analysis of comparable properties in and around the area to ensure that this was kind of a good price, asking price, and we absolutely believe it is, and part of the partnership work that we've been working under. In addition to kind of that term, I think it's important, which is labeled under the purchasing outline. I do think it's important to flag under our overall letter of understanding and our lease outline that right now we are tenants of Rooted and we pay a lease cost every year. Upon purchasing this building, that then would flip. We become the owners and Rooted would lease from us, kind of the office space and the neighborhood center that exists. So it's very important, I think, for you and the overall community to recognize that if and when this building switches hands, Rooted stays in the building is an important part of the Southside community. We fully understand, and the neighborhood center itself stays. Chad can talk about this more in a minute, but there's actually a vision of growing the size of the neighborhood center in this plan as well. So there's a lot of really good moving parts. Since I've covered the purchase price, I'm going to hand it over to Chad and Andrew to kind of talk more about some of the terms of agreement that we agreed to as it relates to the overall elementary school, the combined property itself. So Chad, you want to take it away?
Yeah, so I can certainly add on to where Kelly got us started. Just as excited to be talking about this, mainly because we've been at it for almost a year to figure out where we could possibly put an elementary school on the south side of Madison. I think many of our board members, in particular probably Ananda, knows what land availability is like on the south side of Madison, and there isn't much. So when we first discussed the need for an elementary school on the south side, we also knew that this was going to be a challenge. So this has been a blessing from the get-go that Rooted's been willing to at least engage with us, and the fact that we got this far is really exciting. Other pieces that I've been working on with a team of architects, we actually worked with the same architecture firm that built Rooted to make sure that not only if we were able to acquire the building, but we could also fit an elementary school on that site. The lot is not huge, certainly wouldn't be the smallest that Madison owns, but we've done substantial work with Dimension 4, who is the architecture firm that built Rooted, to come up with a schematic design that proves we can build an elementary school there. It'd be roughly 70,000 square feet, which is about the size of Hawthorne Elementary, refurbished Hawthorne Elementary. And we're excited about where this could all lead, the partnerships that could still be in place with Rooted, what this could mean for a pipeline for Badger Rock, and the fact that we found a school site that's right in the heart of the south side of Madison, where 99% of the students living in that attendance area would have a chance to walk to school. It really is exciting. I don't know, Kelly, if we wanted to get into any of the details on the purchase agreement, but to Kelly's point, we will still have, we're still thinking Rooted would be the Rooted staff, and all the programming and partnerships that have come along with the Badger Rock would still be in place. We have put together a plan that there could be a small addition to the Rooted space, that we would prorate a lease on the back end to have them pay for that following the construction. And we would work through the details there following a past referendum and the building design. And quite honestly, we're just excited that we've made the decision around the direction we're heading with the type of school. And now the community can know months in advance where the school will actually go. We're excited that the conversations got to this point that the board has a chance to vote on it. Andrew or Kelly, I don't know if you had anything else to add, or board members had questions around specifics.
I'll simply also offer my enthusiasm, and then also call out a great appreciation to both Joe Sensenbrenner and Marcia Campbell, who you both heard this evening. They've been terrific partners in this process. So with that, Andy, if you have anything else to add, please do.
I think I would just offer that the documents you have in front of you are not legally binding documents. That's why we call them outlines. These are the terms that both parties have agreed. They're what we call the key deal points in a real estate transaction. And once you flesh these out and have a meeting of the minds with the parties, then the next step, which is if we receive the board's approval, would be to turn them into formal legally binding documents, which would be an actual offer to purchase and a lease. So these documents refer to the terms that would come out of the formal documents if we decide to go that route. And the other one is the letter of understanding. That is well, I don't want to overstep my legal bounds, but Sherry may correct me here, but that is not something that really is can be transferred to another format. That the way it reads right now is pretty much what we would expect to see in any kind of formal document that would be a revision of the letter of understanding. The other two, you've probably seen commercial offers to purchase and leases, and they can run 20, 30 pages. So we didn't want to flood you with all that, and that's just not necessary now with all those very minor terms. But these are all the key deal points that we felt were very fair to both parties, and certainly in the best interest of the school district.
Hey, Nikki, I see I want to add one thing on Andy's thing, which is a timeline. So we would vote tonight. What that does is it kind of locks in the negotiating period, really ends since we both know where we're at. We go to the November referendum, and then once it passes, we move into a bond period, right, where we borrow the funds that would have passed in the referendum. Once those funds are available to us, which is likely in January, then those are the funds that we use to purchase the building. So the formal purchasing documents that Andy's referring to are likely to come to you in the January timeframe. The purpose of this is to get us all on the same page with where we're headed. with Rooted. Rooted knows where we're at. We know that where they're at, kind of moving into these next couple months. So if and when the referendum passes, we can move very quickly.
Kelly, you read my mind. I wanted to know if I could get a copy of the full contract before the final vote in January.
You absolutely will. It'll all be pending the passing of the referendum. Thank you, Nikki.
Kelly and Andy and Andrew and Chad. Before we open it up for questions, Kelly, I just want to clarify the documents that we will be voting on next Monday. I noticed that I think it's the pretty purchase outline includes both buyer's contingencies and joint contingencies. And the 3 joint contingencies involve board votes before September 30th on the lease, a mutual agreement, and an amendment, I think, to the Badger Rock lease. Are those the 3 things that we're voting on? And are the things we're voting on related to those contingencies?
So the Badger Rock lease contingency has been met. The board passed that last month, I think, in the board meeting. So that's done.
Yep.
The government contingencies will continue to happen. So they will be done by January. And so that Chad manages kind of that process with the city, and Rooted is aware of all those timeline, those steps. So, and then obviously the referendum we'll find out in November if it passes. So tonight you are voting to accept these 3 documents, or not tonight, at the end of the month. You'd be voting to accept these 3 documents really in their entirety as the terms of all of our agreements. Post referendum, they'll hit all the right legal different contracts and a formal purchase.
Thank you for that clarification. So are there any questions? Nikki, I see your hand up.
My other question, so then is this vote on the 21st, would it be still legally binding if we, between now and January, we find something or some reason that we would back out if the referendum would pass?
Sherry, do you want to weigh in on that?
Sure. Because there are contingencies built in, Nikki, we would be able to negotiate with Rooted. But part of our coming to you tonight is also because Kelly and Chad have spent a significant amount of time looking for other things. And so really, we don't think there's anything else out there that would meet our needs and the needs of our students.
Just wanted to make sure what our legal obligations were in case, for example, mold, something in the ground, some kind of contaminated water, etc., that we would still be protected.
Yes.
Thank you.
Kelly, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I want to thank you all again for all the work you've done. And I want to thank Marcia and Joe Sensenbrenner for speaking this evening. I absolutely agree with this movement, both in our ability to invest in Badger Rock, which I am hugely supportive of, and I am so grateful that our young people have the opportunity to participate in urban agriculture. And I think it makes sense that our district owns that school, similar to the vast majority of schools within our district. I also think that it is absolutely the right place for us to build the elementary school. I think the ability to serve that immediate community effectively and create a school in walking distance of hundreds of children is really powerful. The last thing I think is really important to speak to is the fact that currently, Madison is annexing the town of Madison, which is, sprinkled throughout the community, but is concentrated in that area. And so I think this provides a really profound opportunity for us to work with the city of Madison to strengthen the access to busing, to strengthen the access to overpasses of that community to meet the needs of our students and serve our students effectively. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity and in full support of us moving forward.
Thanks. Are there other questions or comments? Gloria.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, my question is aligned with what Ali just brought up with the city and the annexation. have we checked to see how many students we would actually take with the annexation and if they would attend this elementary school at some point?
So this particular part of the city already points to MMSD. So when the students move from, when the neighborhood moves from the town to the city, the students are already part of MMSD and would remain part of MMSD. Andrew, I'm sorry, why don't you jump in?
No, I was going to offer a similar response. The students that are in this area geographically are already assigned to the district. They're already assigned to MMSD. So our estimate of about 450 students living in that area in the South Rimrock area, that's already ours. So the annexation doesn't have an impact, and under state law, it's not an automatic shift. It would have to be worked out between school districts if that were not the case, but they're already considered ours. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Chris. Other comments? Nanda.
Thank you. Wow, like I feel like I've been choked up this whole week thinking about this project, and also getting this spillover excitement from Callie as well. I think what Ali was talking about in regards to the collaboration to the city, it's not necessarily about the students. I think she's talking more about the infrastructure in this part of the city, that I think the school will create I think the perfect landscape for a greater visibility of a community that has been historically neglected and often gets to be thought out as a phase 4 or the last year of any mayor, or the last term of any alder or whatever, and it never gets the attention that it deserves. And in particular around sidewalks, in particular around accessibility to transportation, in particular about walkability and access to things that we have in abundance in other parts of the city. So when we talk about the two Madisons, I think the South Side, in particular this area, represents the second Madison that most people never heard of, have never experienced, don't even know it exists. So I really appreciate the attention from all the MSD staff and the ability from my colleagues to really take a moment to come and visit the school, visit the neighborhood, learn more about what folks are trying to do here, and to have a greater connection to the entire district in a way that is meaningful. I think my only my main concern, my really only concern around the building and the projects, and I really appreciate all the pictures and the detail, the mapping of it, is in regards to the school to represent the community. I think that to me feels really important. I think the phase 1 of the project left some opportunities. I think a lot of folks in the community weren't really sure, didn't even know how to engage. I think from that time to today, a lot has changed. People are owning that space and the center and the neighborhood center in a much more intentional way, and even in the surrounding areas of the South Side, we've seen a greater presence from other community members. I think the other piece of concern, I don't say concern because I know it's addressed on a memo, but I wanted to get a little bit more clarification in regards to the gardens. I know that there'll be a lot of shifting. To me, that feels extremely important to keep as much as we can, but also to make some guarantees of what we're actually going to keep. I think that transparency in that process, I think, is really important. I think this is the first year that we had community gardens, raised beds and things like that, where community members could, own. And there were a lot of people that was the first time that they're participating in that way with their relationship with land and growing produce. And I think that is a matter of great interest of our community, particularly communities of color. I really hope that throughout the process of both purchasing and the building, that when times of dissent or times of concern, that people are respectful of this community. I think that we tend to, because of our positions of power, we tend to forget that we're talking about human beings, human lives. We tend to forget that the folks that live around here are people that are often neglected by the political discourse, or even engaged or outreach to engage in that. So I really hope that, as we're moving forward, that we can make collective decisions about what's best for this community and really focus on that. But I really appreciate everyone's work. Thank you so much, Chad and Andy, for all the work that you've been putting in. Thank you, Andrew, for all the data analysis and the elevating this as a perpetual inequitable problem that we have to reconcile. And thank you, Kelly, for doing a lot of the groundwork on talking to folks. I will share that I had a really great conversation with Sherry Carter, who is our alder here on the South Side. And it was met with equally excitement of the need to have greater attention and take this community as a matter of our responsibility. So that's the only thing I would like to say. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to my my passion for this neighborhood. I really care about the space.
Ananda, Chris and Savian, we haven't heard from you. Did you guys have comments or questions?
Say I am excited to participate in the walking school bus from the UW Health. That's going to be very exciting. So looking forward to that coming to fruition.
All right, I will add my excitement about this. I think I'm really happy to see that we've come to an agreement that preserves the urban agriculture function of the property. I think that is of such incredible value to the community and to our students, both Badger Rock students and the future elementary students who will hopefully be on this piece of property in a school if we pass the facilities referendum. Thank you so much for all of your work in pulling this together. And I just want to reiterate that this is just a first step in a process of really, we have to pass the referendum, and then, we've committed to letting the residents of the South Side determine the design and the function of this school. And I think our work going forward as a board is, the purchase agreements are easy, but we have to make sure that we're putting participatory processes in place that share power, as Ananda pointed out, in really meaningful ways. And that, I think, is going to be possibly the most important work of this initiative moving forward. So thanks again, everybody. And we can move on to the next agenda item, which is talking about operations and virtual learning. And Chad, I think you're the lead person on that.
Yep. It's going to stay up with me. I'm going to ask Karen Kepler, Sally Zerbaldanovich, and am I missing anyone? To kind of come forward. I'm just going to kick us off, but what I want to make sure everyone knows is the team that's about to present to you, Barbie can go to the next slide, has done a tremendous amount of work since literally the moment we all heard of the word COVID and learned what that acronym kind of meant. The team you're about to hear from immediately got on the ground from the operations side of the house to support kids within hours. That includes Chad Weezy on food service, Sally with the health and safety of our kids. Top to bottom, Karen Kepler has been pulling this team together and moving us in the right direction. The work they're about to share with you is not only the work that we've done in order to ensure that school started just this last week, but that we're ready for kids when it's safe to bring kids back into the building. This is the team that has thought of every possible plan, strategy, and then when that didn't work for various reasons, mostly related to COVID's turn on us, rethought them again and got ready within hours for the next plan. And in some cases, Plan B or Plan C was what we had to implement due to the circumstances. So endless amounts of thanks from the team you're about to hear from. And the great work they've done and the great work they're planning for when kids are ready. The link on the bottom of this page right here goes to our website. It is the MMSD Reopening Schools Plan. This plan is like the sister to the instructional continuing guidance in that it has all the information that families and that staff members might want regarding implementation of our safety procedures, everything from hand washing protocol to the signs that you will see in our hallways when students are back in session, and our food service and transportation technology planning is all in that. Way more details than anyone would want. But the idea is that if you have a question, the answer is there. So many thanks to Karen Kepler, who I'm going to ask to present kind of the next slide as the head of the work in pulling this all together. Karen, are you there? I can't see everybody.
Here we go.
There she is.
Hi, hello, good evening. Just really fun and just a really nice night to hear all the things that are going on in our district. And I haven't heard a deep appreciation to this board. It really warms my heart that the board did not allow COVID to stop all the progress for our school district. We keep moving forward. So deep appreciation to all of you so that we can also keep some of this planning going along without distraction. So I also want to call out special appreciation to Madison-Dane County Public Health, who has been along with us since February, guiding us along the way, Dane County Emergency Management, and all our school leaders and our district department leaders. We couldn't do it without everyone pitching in and problem solving around this. So as Kelly said, while we were planning for virtual learning, we were also planning, and we continue to plan for a safe return for in-person instruction. What you have here is there's a couple of guidance documents that we've been working with Department of Health and also with Madison-Dane County Public Health. There is a guidance document about a school's readiness to return to school. And so it's like the ultimate checklist. I know you guys are all excited about checklists. I certainly am. It just ensures that we have everything that we need, and it assures the public that we're ready for schools to reopen. So some of the things that you'll also see in our guidance document that we put on the web is visitor and non-essential person restrictions. Do we have those in place? Do we have special trainings for students and also for staff? And how do we monitor screening of students and staff? So we do need to identify that piece, along with, are we ready with PPE and other kind of supplies? So you'll hear some of those things from Sally, and also Chad will speak to some of the things that we have been planning around. A heavy piece that also we have to consider is how we are communicating, and communicating just isn't to our families, which certainly is an important piece. It's also making sure that we have a point of contact in every school for contact tracing, how we're reporting that. So a deep plan for communication is underway around that as well. And then also, how are we communicating our closure procedures in the future? So lots of things that are here, more that will be coming up and giving you an update on that. I am now going to pass this on to Sally, and she can talk a little bit more around health and safety and her work in this area.
Barbara, if you could move to the next slide, please.
Yeah. Hi, thank you for having me here tonight. I'm really happy to talk about the work that we've done around health and safety. A huge piece of that, kind of like a little pilot piece that has been done, is our work with MSCR Cares this summer, and what we're continuing to do this fall. It has really been educational and helpful as we plan to bring our schools back into session, hopefully sometime in the near future here. And as Karen said, a huge thank you to Public Health Dane County, who has been partners with us as we developed our plans and work around these health and safety issues. I also just want to call out the school nurses who have been kind of working tirelessly to really promote the health and safety of our students. Their work is really critical as we bring our students back into our buildings. And here are some of the areas that we really needed to focus on to really, that we've learned around bringing kids back with, and some of these have been really staying home when families have students or staff. Really, we're having to change the verbiage we've usually given as, you know, it's okay to come to school with a cold, to say, no, if you have a cold, you really need to stay home. So really, education is huge here. We've done a lot of work around hand hygiene and education. Chad's team has put together some really nice cleaning kits and hand sanitizer equipment. So we're, you know, our classrooms are ready to go. Around cloth face coverings, I think what we learned this summer was that it was sometimes harder for staff to wear masks than it was children to wear masks. And so really educating our staff the importance of it, and then they can really work as role models with our students. We've developed some systems around PPE. Again, special ed, building services, and health services have worked together, really looking at how to purchase and then distribute those pieces. And that's sometimes more complicated than you think, but I think we've done a lot of work. You can see that guidance in the reopening schools document that really talks about how we distribute that and how that looks. Also working with our staff around physical distancing, just kind of helping them set up classrooms right now in the daycare program. Just what 6 feet distance is. I don't know if you've really looked at 6 feet, but it's a ways. I mean, that's stretching out your arms is about 6 feet. And so that is really working hard to optimize those classrooms around that. We are just kind of rolled out a symptom screener for our staff that are in our buildings with HR. And we'll be tweaking that, but I think it's a really good start as we think about bringing more staff into our buildings. We also are doing temperature screens with our daycare students, and that has gone well. I think in the beginning, you always were asking our parents also to do some reporting about their students' illness and filling out some documents. And, you know, we work with our MSCR and our other daycare providers to make sure that those are completed and followed through. And again, we have these great little cleaning kits in the classrooms for teachers to help keep the classrooms clean. And Chad has done a great job with his custodians in helping them know what they need to do. I think communication is key around all of this. I think we have our usual ways of communicating, which is kind of the district website and principals' newsletters. And we've done a lot of work around guidance for our MSCR program and daycares, and that, you know, there's parent guidance, there's guidance for staff, there's guidance for health offices. And then again, as I mentioned, there's a good section in our reopening schools about health and safety. And really every staff member that has been up back into our buildings at this time has had some type of virtual or in-person training. And we're working with our PD department and HR to even do that a little bit more sophisticated through the learning management system. So that will be probably rolling out in the next couple of weeks. Again, I think the roles and responsibilities of health staff and nurses is really a lot has been around educating. You just continually are educating students and staff about the protective behaviors that we all need to take and the risk mitigation efforts. Nurses are really key as we need to really assess students because not every student needs to go home who has some symptoms. Some definitely do, but really figuring out who that is, who needs to go home and who doesn't, and who should come to school and who shouldn't be coming. We're also doing a lot of work right now with contact tracing and working with public health. Schools are really the ones who are responsible for doing any follow-up for probable or positive COVID-19 cases. So if there is a student or staff member who tests positive for COVID-19, we'll be talking with that staff member or with that family, and then identifying those who have had close contact with that individual, and then most likely quarantining, that group. And that's why we really try to cohort our students in small groups, because then you have less people that you need to quarantine. And again, we just, and we work very closely with public health around this. And I guess, and we also are continuing to do some work with the university around surveillance testing and for COVID-19 and testing if there may be students who may be positive in our buildings who have symptoms. So really we have a team that's meeting every other week and trying to look at this area more closely, because that definitely we know, and we know through contact tracing that, public health is oftentimes overwhelmed, especially now with the numbers that they have, and they were this summer as well. So that it's really key that we connect with individuals ourselves and get on this right away so we can isolate or quarantine and just make sure we have safe environments to do that. So yeah, that's all I have to say. But it's been, it's all good work, and it's just every day there's something new that we're learning, and we keep adding that to our knowledge. And, I do feel like we have done really good work, and I feel good about where we are right now. I feel really good about our daycare program and where we're at with that. And we've really been able to provide a safe environment for our students, and we'll continue to do that. So that's all I have to say right now. So I don't know if
Kelly, we'll go through the end of the slides. If Chad, you want to take on the next one?
Yeah, I've got the next few. I'm going to try to be as concise as possible. We're on the 3-hour mark, so I'll get through these slides to start with. I think you might have skipped one slide ahead, potentially, Barb. No, back. There we go. Nope, one more, Barb, forward. All right, perfect. So to build on what Sally mentioned, we've been to work almost immediately when this thing broke loose in March, trying to look ahead in terms of what it's going to take for us to have the physical space ready to go when we reopen. The MSER's CARES program has been actually a blessing in disguise, pushing the work of our team to make sure facilities were ready to go. As Sally mentioned, we actually, we built almost our own little Amazon distribution hub in the gym of La Follette High School, where we put together essentially COVID packages that we shipped to schools in mid-August that contained signage, portable plexiglass barriers. We put together over 3,000 classroom cleaning kits that included cleaner, paper towels, plastic gloves, hand sanitizer. We've been on a regular water flushing program. Stagnant water can actually be quite dangerous, which was a concern in our schools, and we've been ahead of that. We've had weekly meetings with our custodian, very frequent meetings with our principals. We were actually the first department to kick off the use of the learning management system, where we put together a training protocol on cleaning practices for our custodial unit. We have now hung almost like subway style plexiglass barriers in all of our offices coming off the ceiling. Our own carpenters did that. And we're continuing to just work with Sally's staff and John Harper's staff in terms of making sure that we have the personal protective equipment necessary to protect staff and students that we already have back in schools and will have back in schools, and just continue to do what we can to stockpile the necessary materials to if and when we all head back to school, that we're ready to go. Next slide. I did want to just call out because there is actually a consent agenda item on this. We have also been working closely with a number of vendors, area school districts, and some local experts on coming up with a plan to make sure our air is as safe as it can be. And here is the recommendation that we have landed on moving forward in terms of air quality improvements around the district. As everyone knows, we've got aging mechanical systems around our district. Many of the things that our own district tradespeople that they are doing on a daily and weekly basis to upkeep. In some cases, they're working on some hardware that might be 50 plus years old. And we were charged with the mission of making sure that our mechanical equipment still worked, but our air was as safe as possible. So if there's one thing I want the board to take away from this slide, is that we are attempting to accomplish two things with what we have on the consent agenda. One, ensure that our ventilation systems are operating properly. And that includes making sure that we have enough fresh air circulating in our buildings. That is the #1 recommendation coming out of what the state put out and what the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning is putting out. Make sure your systems are working properly and you can increase fresh air. 1. 2, what we're sending to the school board here in September is really a consent agenda to purchase a whole bunch of filters. Currently, we spend about $50,000 a year on some basic filters that we've been using forever, and we are recommending increasing the amount of filtration that happens in our heating and cooling systems to the maximum that it would be allowed per what the mechanical systems can handle. We do not want to filter our mechanical systems to the point that they break, or we do not get enough fresh air into our spaces. So we're filtering them to the max, and I'll certainly answer questions if folks have that any there tonight. But those are the big two things I wanted the board to take away from our recommendation. Next. Quick update on transportation. Again, CARES pushed us on this to make sure we had a plan. We have worked with our transportation providers, primarily Badger right now, because we're not running any Madison Metro, to update our procedures on cleaning, seating charts, PPE. We are right now running our buses at 1 student per seat, and it's the same seat on the way in and the way out. We are providing transportation for MSCR CARES, special ed, and some private and parochial. We did make the decision to issue Madison Metro bus passes to high school and middle school students that needed them. And we have standing meetings with our transportation providers. We've vetted all of these plans that are up on our website and on the reopening document with County Health, and feel really good about where our transportation plan's at. As a reminder, we mentioned this a number of times, we are continuing to work with Badger Bus and Madison Metro to make sure that we have drivers available in the event that we need more of them because we're sending more kids to school. So that's an ongoing conversation in an area of focus with transportation. Next. In terms of technology, I think the board's seen a number of these possibly on updates. Couldn't be more proud of the work that our tech services staff has done. As a reminder, we are currently staffed at the same staffing levels we had 10 years ago, before one Chromebook existed in this district, and now we've got over 25,000. Before one staff laptop existed, and now we've got over 3,500. And we have been thrust into running a virtual school district of 25,000 plus students in a matter of a few months, and our tech services staff has done nothing but step up to the plate to try to support this work. So just in the past 3 weeks, we have exchanged now, after today, is actually over 12,000 devices, and maybe some board members have seen the tents we've had set up around the district to do that safely. We're continuing to send out hotspots to students that need them. Those are available for pickup at schools, and we've been sending them out on Badger buses. We've continued with outdoor Wi-Fi in certain areas, and feel really good about the hard work that's happened at light speed to make sure that our students have what they need to carry on with instruction virtually. We continue to work at making sure our infrastructure is in a good place, knocking on wood. Our website is held up for the most part. Zoom's been fairly stable. Our internet backbone's been stable. Really proud of the work that's happened on the technology side. I've got one more, I think, on food service, if I'm not mistaken, Barb. And lastly, just an update in terms of where we're at with food service. And this did also come out in a newsletter. We pushed hard to reflect on the work that we did in the spring. Again, we had to invent this on the fly when this hit in March. And we've flipped our approach completely on its head. We've gone from delivering to just under 20 sites on a daily basis to doing 40 sites on a weekly basis. And we've gone from doing one meal, a breakfast and a lunch at a time, to actually serving families and students 10 meals in one pickup. And this has gone really well through week one. Week one, we did way over double the amount of meals that we were doing in the spring. And that, if you remember last week, the weather was terrible. We're expecting those numbers to continue to climb as word gets out. We are also working on a plan to have food delivered to families that cannot get to one of our 40 pickup locations. And that plan's already started, and we're hoping that's rolled out before we get to October. Got really good news from the USDA allowing us a waiver that we did not have to verify student identity at the drop sites.
Yes.
It was super news for us, meaning any student can go to any one of our 40 schools to pick up a meal, and the USDA gave that waiver, which was amazing. We've continued to update our schools and principals along the way. We had a press release that went out last week, and we'll continue to push out communication along the way as far as our food service program goes. In closing, I can't say enough about the staff that I've had an honor to work with over the last few months. Our food services staff, as I said, way outside the box in terms of anything they've ever done. Technical services has been sitting underneath a tent for a month, distributing Chromebooks, and then having to support all of the back end stuff that's been necessary. Building services has stepped up big time doing work to ready our facilities and train our custodians. Overall, and our transportation department's done amazing work as well. So can't thank enough those folks, the dedicated work that they have done over the last few months to make sure schools were ready to go. That was quick. I don't know how much more we have before we take questions, but I wanted to make sure I respected everybody's time.
Thank you, Chad. You did a great job. Barbara, would you go to the next slide? So just in kind of wrap up, I can't tell you how hard this team you've heard from and those who work on their teams have been working literally since March 12th, overtime to get all this in front of you. In just a couple slides, I think you'll get a good breadth of their work when you take a look at the attached reopening plan. But we wanted to make sure that the most important information was in front of you and to make sure you understood that this team is ready to open school when the data and science allows us to open school. And we'll do that in partnership with public health as we have since March 12th. Sally kind of leads up that effort and that relationship with public health, and we can't thank her enough for staying on top of all that data and working with us. Dr. Jenkins, I realized that I neglected to give you the opening comments in my rush to get into this. So before we open it up, I apologize for that. Is there anything you'd like to add before we open it up for questions?
Let me say you did a fabulous job, first of all, and I saw the excitement. You were just so ready to get to it, okay? It's okay, perfectly fine. But let me say this, because I would be remiss. When you think about our children taking care of the whole child, these individuals that you just heard from, they are part of taking care of the whole child, the whole family. And when I had an opportunity with Sally to meet with the nurses, I went over to our childcare programming and to see how serious they were about it and doing their professional development, listening to Chad all the time about his work, and to Karen, I want to tell you publicly, they are carrying a lot of the weight for us, and the people who are working with them, and those individuals don't get seen a lot, don't get talked about a lot, but I just want to say it here publicly. Thank you to you guys for what you're doing, because you're outstanding, and I couldn't want to be with another crew other than the crew that we have here in Madison Metropolitan School District. When I hear the parents giving compliments, you guys are truly deserving of it, so thank you. I just wanted to say that, and thank you, Kelly, for your leadership with this. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. And let's open it up for questions. Ananda, did I see your hand?
Yeah, just one comment to extend the thanks to a lot of the school staff that also volunteered hours to make sure that they were on those sites. They made sure that the families were contacted, that they know when and where to pick up things. It was a massive enterprise, and thank you for the entire team for that. I should have mentioned that when we were having the conversation about the compensation, because I think all those things are connected. You know, in regards to the unexpected of what we're going to see, you know, I think one of the reasons that it may worked, or it was not as hard to create this distribution enterprise was the weather was helped, but if we continue to be in this space, we may have to move some of those things indoor, which will present different challenges, and the ability of our families to reach some of those sites in a long term may be impaired by snow days or transportation during the cold weather and whatnot. So I'm really thinking ahead of like what is the sustainability of this work in regards to the added complexities of the weather. The other piece that it's not necessarily connected to this, but there's something Sally, I really appreciate your presentation too. It's great to see you and to know that you're doing so many great work. But I think that we don't know, I don't know, like what are some of the staff needs in regards to this work from home situation when they're managing work from home for their own children. And I want us to have a conversation. I wanted to just put it out there for future conversation around what are some of the things that we can do to support our staff working from home that is beyond what we have provided yet, and maybe I don't know everything that we have provided, but one of the things that I'm thinking about is, what is our staff accessibility to internet? What is our staff accessibility to dual monitoring, do a monitor, or service, or a chair that they can sit all day for classes. I'm, as we're having conversations about long-term of the impact of COVID, I'm just really curious about like, what are some of the things that we can start thinking about that all have a price tag, but could provide a great level of support both for our educators and have a more dignity or more dignifying way for them to do their work.
So actually, Deirdre might have a couple of things to say from the HR lens about kind of some things that might help to be supportive for staff. I don't know if Sally, if you have anything to add or thoughts coming to mind, but Deirdre certainly staying in touch with our staff and tied back to the previous conversation. I think there's some ideas that we have in mind now, knowing where the board kind of sits on some of the other conversations. That might allow some more funding down to the more local level.
All right, I saw Ollie and then Chris. So go ahead, Ollie.
Thank you so much, Chris. Sally, it's really wonderful to get to have you here. And we have to thank you for all the work that you've done to help guide us in making the right decisions for our young people. Karen, I want to thank you as well. And the entire team. I also really appreciate Dr. Jenkins, you're emphasizing our custodial staff and our food services staff and the folks that we don't usually get to shout out during a board meeting, who are really the backbone of our school district. And there are so many people who are benefiting from programming that up until this recent pandemic and economic fallout, they never needed before. And so it's a big deal to be able to make sure that kiddos in our community have warm meals each day, and thanking those people is something we cannot do enough. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to that. Sally, I'm hoping that you can speak a little bit to what we're doing to support the mental health components of this work, and some of the more emotionally strenuous elements of this work, particularly as it is developmentally appropriate to have these conversations with our kiddos about COVID and the risks. And Karen, I would invite you to chime in as well.
If you're on to it, it might be nice for you to join.
I know that our student staff and support team, Armando and Kristen, both are working on this heavily. And I can't really speak to specifics, but I know that there is a lot of work going on that's being addressed around the mental health. And, and I know they're looking at universal supports. I know they're looking at both the secondary and tertiary supports as well. So I know there is a lot of planning with that. And I know there's a lot of planning going around. I know, Ananda, you talked about staff supports there. I know with HR and with our department, there is planning going on and how we can best support both our staff and students. And I know that our partnerships are continuing and they're working hard to bring those mental health supports such as BHS into schools virtually, and looking at our daycares and seeing how we can provide supports there as well. So.
Thanks, Sally. I'll just add that I know that launching into the school year, I know school leaders spent a great bit of time dedicating time about staff wellness to kind of launch it in, and also building family relationships and outreach. So we can certainly make sure that Jay is providing an update from his team to this board about what our continual plans are, building upon what they launched in the beginning of the school year.
All right, Chris, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, thanks. Thank you for the operations update side of this pandemic we've been dealing with. We've talked about the instructional side a few times, and I think this operations work that you are all doing is really important for people to understand, and the extensive work that has gone into it. I just really appreciate all of you who have been leading this work. I took a look at the reopening Dane County schools, the metrics, and I think that's really important for people to take a look at because it does give guidance at the K-2 to 3 to 5 and the middle and high school level for when it is going to be safe for us to reopen in Dane County. And just, I really wanted to emphasize how important it is for our community to understand that our ability to go back into schools with students depends on what our community does. And so we really are in this together. And so the decisions that everybody makes collectively will impact our timeline for getting kids back into the schools. But I do think these metrics, the 14-day averages and how they play out in Dane County, I'd be interested to know if there are more specific ones that we're going to use for Madison and how those are going to kind of work. And the other questions are kind of around our reopening school plans. And I was noticing that the school nurses are designated as the contact people for the communication we do and the responses. And I guess I'm curious if these people, as we get back into a hybrid model or however this is going to start, if these people can do both the care that students and even staff are going to need and do the contact tracing and communication that's going to need to be done logistically. And so I'm sort of wondering if we need more people to help with that piece, and just sort of curious how that is going to work. And then my last question is if we are going to have any testing for students and staff along the way. And if we're not going to do that in the schools, just again, how important it is for our community to be able to do that and provide that service for us to logistically be able to go back. Sorry, that's a lot. It's like a mouthful. That was 10 questions in one.
So Chris, I'll attempt to answer them, and maybe I'll go backwards to forward. Backwards, we are working, we are getting out to our school member, our school community, both families and staff, that there are local sites where you can go get tested for COVID. And what's nice about those sites is that you don't need to have symptoms. If you go to your healthcare provider, you kind of have to have symptoms. So, so we make that available to our staff. We are working, like I said, with the university, with the Department of Pediatrics and the Department of Infectious Diseases, and with some others from the School of Veterinary Medicine, because they have been doing testing using a different type of testing than we're accustomed to with animals that we're now maybe using with humans. That's kind of the saliva testing that maybe you've heard or read about. So so we are definitely exploring that. The cost right now is kind of prohibitive, but we are maybe looking at doing a pilot, a research study, and more about that will be coming your way in the next few weeks. And then the other question about, do we have enough staff as nursing staff as we bring back more staff into our buildings? I just had a meeting with Kelly last week, and there are funds available to hire some LTE staff if needed to do some contact tracing. So we are looking at that, and we'll just, we're just going to kind of gauge it as we need it. So, and then we are looking, Andrew is really working, kind of heading up the team on what we need to bring our students and staff back into our buildings, that data and metrics piece. So I don't know, Andrew, if you want to say anything, but we're looking at a number of factors, public health being one of those factors. So.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. The Public Health of Madison-Dane County published their guidelines for schools to return. And it's set on various thresholds that represent the average count over a 14-day period of how many new cases occur within all of Dane County. So the cut score to offer hybrid or in-person instruction is 54 cases per day on average. At a certain point then, you can extend that beyond K1-2. So you start with a phase of K1-2 at an average of 54 or fewer. You can then, district can then offer a shift from virtual to in-person instruction or hybrid instruction at 39. And then for all secondary grades, a threshold of 19. So those thresholds have to be maintained over a 4-week period. So if there is a certain count that is below or between these numbers, the Dane County Public Health Guidelines indicate that a district may offer, but is not compelled or required to offer, but may offer instruction in person. The situation currently, Public Health publishes that number every couple of weeks, every Thursday. So the most recent publication has actually got us increased to about 95 cases per day. Public Health has not stated reconsideration of those districts that have chosen to open for K1-2 instruction, but they certainly do recommend looking at the numbers that they're publishing, because really one of the first things you're going to want to look at is whether or not the community itself can support reopening schools. Kind of a two-part equation. We just talked tonight about a lot of the things you would do once you've opened, but the question, should you open, really is supported heavily by public health and this community-wide number. So public health has put those guidelines out there. We have exceeded the 54 currently. Again, they are not retracting the permission for districts to offer K1-2, though this district would really benefit from looking at, Chris, as you pointed out, a Madison-specific number. And the current condition is really driven by a lot of cases generated from UW's testing. And of course, we have attendance areas that abut and or included in campus or isthmus areas. So it's a very relevant number for us to look at a county-wide number. Only briefly, and I'll be getting into legal territory, so Sherry needs to step in. I'll provide an update that the Supreme Court of the state of Wisconsin has provided a temporary injunction on the county's authority to direct schools to follow those thresholds. But it certainly is advised to follow those thresholds.
Thank you for all the answers. That's helpful.
I'll piggyback on a couple of Chris's questions. I just want to reiterate the fact that contact tracing can be incredibly time-consuming work, and I think we need to make sure that we do budget for additional support with that should it become necessary to do a fair amount of contact tracing in a school community. When contact tracing is done well, it's not just about calling families and telling them that their child might have been exposed to COVID. It's also supporting families who need to quarantine and for whom quarantining might be extremely difficult. So I think as a district, we need to think about not just the phone calls, but also the really the social work that goes into supporting a family that may have to quarantine for 14 days and understanding what a hardship that might be for families that have to work or who might have trouble obtaining food if they're quarantined.
Yep. Thanks, Chris. So built into the budget, in addition to the additional funding for nurses for the contact tracing, is social work, social worker kind of extended employment to also, and or if LTE are needed to support the social work side of that as well. So very good point. I just want to make sure you know that is part of the COVID money that we have budget, along with additional mental health supports for students and family through Armando's department, is all part of kind of the trifecta of the health and mental safety in the budget.
Thanks. And then
I would just like to mention too, we did had a grant through the Wisconsin Partnership Program this summer, and really where nurses and social workers really connected and supported families, and it was really extremely successful. So I think, what's key is all of us working together to support families and working as a team. So I just wanted to add that and we'll continue to do that working together piece.
Thanks for all of that information. And then my second comment is bigger picture. So the next time we're going to talk about operations and COVID is at the October operations work group meeting. And on one hand, Andrew pointed out that our numbers in Dane County do not look good right now. And we're not really sure if that's just a temporary spike or if they're going to be sustained this way. But the end of the quarter is a couple weeks after operations work group meets in October. So that's a decision point. And I'm curious what this board's role is in making decisions about second quarter, and if there's anything we need to be prepared to do in October or sooner.
Well, I could just tell you from my end of it as we're looking at it, and I'm also meeting with the Department of Health. Can you hear me? I see you can. Okay. We're going to have our advisory group together and really think about what should be our next steps based upon the recent information that's coming out, the metrics you see the rise in Dane County, and what hasn't been mentioned in here when we consider to be an outbreak, if there's 2 or more situations within a school setting. We've seen schools go back early and then they had to shut down. When you're talking about hiring more social workers or nurses, it's going to be very complicated to try to open schools back and have the outbreaks. So we're going to have to really work together, as was stated by Sally, to listen to what the science is telling us and what's going to be in our best interest. So I think we have to have discussions not only with the board, the administration, with the Department of Health, because we educate. They're the science, they have the science behind it, and we should follow their recommendations for it. That's what I'm going to say. Board members should be involved with this conversation heavily on this particular decision. It's everybody.
Gloria.
Sorry, just to follow up on that, Chris, I think that was an excellent question. I think, you know, what has happened in the past is, you know, we've made the decision before public health has made a decision. So we have demonstrated sort of that leadership in calling it and making those decisions before even public health comes in. So I'm glad that you will be focusing on the science and letting that make you know, guide you in making that decision. But I think, you know, we're gonna have to do it. You know, I think based on what we hear is, you know, you and your leadership team and your administration will have to make that decision based on what you're hearing.
Yeah, so Chris, you mentioned.
Of course, we will continue to support you as a board in the decisions that you make.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But let me just tell you this. I have no problem with making a decision. I was the first district in the state of Minnesota to close. And that was without the Department of Health at that time, because I've been involved with this. We sent our first letter out February the 6th. I've been involved in watching the science behind this when Johns Hopkins came out early. Actually, it came out in late January. We sent our first letter out February the 6th. But I do think it's in our best interest to work with our partners around us in talking about the Department of Health and listening to the science. But also what hasn't been added to our discussion, children of color, Black and brown, are more likely, more susceptible to actually contract the virus. And so once it hits and you start talking about the contact tracing within our community, it could spread faster. So thank you for saying that. But my thing is to make a recommendation to the board based upon having the best evidence of what could be perhaps dangerous for our community and the best interests of our students, staff, and our entire community. So that's where we are, where I am right now. And I look forward to moving forward in collaboration with everyone.
Chris, I just wanted to comment on your comment regarding Operation Work Group. So this has been set up such that you all had the briefing on the instruction side. Tonight is on the operation side, but deciding whether students go back to school is not an operation decision, nor is it an instruction decision alone. So I, kind of moving forward, I would recommend that like the special meeting format is probably the most appropriate. and that it's not truly an operation kind of work group nor an instruction work group specific conversation. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there for framing that certainly this is not just an operational decision.
Thank you, Kelly. And
That's really helpful.
collaboration.
Yeah. Any final questions before we wrap up?
I think Nikki had her hand up.
Savian?
Sorry, just want to take this opportunity to wish our incoming Chief of Staff, Dr. McGregory, a happy birthday. 3.5 hours. I had a similar experience on my birthday, but happy birthday, Doctor.
Now you have to sing.
Should I?
Happy birthday. Feliz aniversario.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for having lots of stamina, getting through a 3.5 hour meeting. And I feel like we got a lot done. We got a lot of information out. And so it was a good use of our time. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I second.
All right. All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Everyone.